like that weather outside is getting much cooler and that storm is getting closer to us. So with that in mind, we look forward to moving on with our agenda. We are still on pension plans, actuarially determined contributions, or the ADC. We are with the actuary, Paul Wood here, who's walking us through kind of the pros and cons of moving into this system. We're on page 17 of the PowerPoint. That's where we left off before we broke for lunch. And with that, committee members, any comments before we get going, work through the PowerPoint? All right, seeing none, Mr. Wood, if you're ready, go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was wrong earlier. There was a free lunch today, thanks to Dave. He bought me lunch. So there is such thing as a free lunch. Anyhow, slide 17. Now it's time to talk about, what are some policy considerations for your plan individually? So what are the decision points? And then how do we come up with a framework to maybe think about implementing an actuarially determined contribution process? And so on slide 18, we'll move ahead one slide. Like I've said, if I can't be excited about this, how can I expect you all to be excited about it? And so this is such a great opportunity, I think, for us all to work together to, if at the very least you come away with a lot more knowledge than you started with today, which I'm so appreciative of, to be part of that. And so really, in order for this process to be really effective from all the different levels, we do have to strike this balance between benefit security. So are we going to be able to pay our retirees what they're owed? Some nimbleness to the rate changes. So, are we keeping on top of and reacting appropriately and being proactive about some of those moves and our contribution, while at the same time not burdening the state and our local employers? So those are kind of all the stakeholders that have a say in all of this. And again, going back to it, we know that unfunded accrued liability, the UAL, has to be paid off at some point. So why not have a really great plan to do that? So on slide 19, this is like the absolute preaching to the choir slide. I think you all could tell me about the budget process way more than I could tell you about it. But the key takeaway here is that, what we would envision is that with this budgeting cycle, you'd have about 14 months to give notice to the local governments before any sort of rate change takes effect. And so that would give them what I would imagine would be ample time to prepare for that. But it also shows that we are able to meet this type of budgeting schedule without any issues. So moving on to slide 20, one of the biggest decision points when it comes to an actuarially determined contribution is how do we want to pay off that unfunded accrued liability? And that's what we call the amortization policy. As I mentioned earlier, the board has a policy that they have adopted for their metric that they compare the statutory contribution to. And effectively, it was that chart where I had the rings of the tree that we saw a little bit earlier. And it was that 30-year amortization of the unfunded amount at 2018, and then adding those new layers every year. And maybe just to go back to that layering really quick, the reason why that works is that you should have offsetting gains and losses every year. And so if you have one year where you have really great investments, then that's great. The next year it's not so great. Those two should offset over time. And so you still are working towards that goal of paying off that big unfunded amount, that initial piece, with some of this noise in between to make sure that our contribution doesn't really jump around all that much. So we do have, a policy set in place that the board seems to like quite a bit. There certainly are other options. One of the other options would be to reset that period. And, we're 5 years down the board's policy right now. So there's 25 years remaining. You could certainly think about resetting it. The only item that I would caution on a reset is this would be similar to refinancing your mortgage on your house. And I think everyone knows that, yep, you may lower your payment, but you're not going to make progress on paying it off as quickly. And in the public sector, the way that we typically do these amortization pieces is that the payment is expected to grow as payroll grows. So when you divide the payment by the payroll, the percent stays level. And so if you re-amortize or refinance this accrued liability and you stay on that path with an increasing payment, you're gonna end up with a really odd situation called negative amortization, where basically your mortgage on your home is going to increase before it starts to decrease again. And so if there is any consideration of resetting this period, I would advise that we use a level dollar approach similar to the way we would pay off our home mortgages, where that very first payment is enough to cover interest on your principal. And that very first payment is starting to make some progress on paying down the unfunded accrued liability. The other item, we could consider a phase-in of the ADC over a predetermined period. We know that we're at 18.62. We need to get a couple percent higher than that. So we may not be able to take it all in one bite. And so we could phase into that over a multiple year period. Slide 21, moving on to 21. I think this is sort of alluded to earlier in part of the discussions, to guardrail or not to guardrail. And basically, this is just saying, in those years in which the contribution is going to change, do we limit how much it changes? And so if we have just absolutely no limits on it whatsoever, it could change up or down one way or the other every single year. And that's a great policy that works for a lot of folks, works for a lot of states, works for Arizona, Rhode Island. There's a bunch of other ones. But it's a pretty tall or pretty big leap from where we're at today, having this fixed rate where we have to, again, put our hands on the wheel to make any changes, to go into this unfettered ADC approach. And so we think it would be appropriate to consider some guardrails. So in any given year, maybe the rate can't increase by more than 1% or 2%. You could put a floor on it to say it could never decrease until we're fully funded. And that would accelerate funding in those years in which we have positive returns. And it could provide a little bit more budget stability. So there's like I said, this myriad of options here, and it really comes down to, again, what are we looking for our plan to be? Do we want more certainty than we do certainty in our contribution, or do we want more certainty in our funded ratio? And so those are those trade-offs. What's really interesting is that, let's say that you adopt an ADC policy and you put a really super tight guardrail on it. What's interesting about that is that tends to act like a fixed rate plan more than your plan does right now, because you would, if you're not going to be changing those contribution rates by very much, and that's your policy, then we don't have the opportunity to come back as a group and to say, well, we need 2 or 3% this year. Like, oh, sorry, you've got the ADC policy, and so it really starts to operate more like a fixed rate plan. So I think we want to be careful about having too tight of a guardrail, but having some guardrail is certainly appropriate. So on 22, this is where we start to get into some of the various scenarios. And this is just, again, we picked 6 different things to look at. What you're going to notice is that they all operate very similarly. It's just kind of how do we get from here to to these ADC amounts. So first, the baseline scenario. This is just assuming 18.62 every year going forward. Scenario 1 is moving to ADC, and this is the unfettered ADC, where that rate can change. Although we'll obviously never let it go below 0%. I don't think it would be appropriate for the plan to start paying the state. That would break some laws, I believe. So we do have that contribution rate floor is 0%. Scenario 2 is moving to ADC funding with guardrails of plus or minus 1%. So basically, in any given 2-year biennium, the contribution would only change one time at the beginning of that budgeting period. And scenario 2 also sets a minimum contribution at the normal cost. And so basically just says, if we reach over 100% funded, we're not going to pat ourselves on the back and give ourselves just a little bit of credit. We're going to just continue to pay that normal cost and maybe build up a little bit of a cushion over 100% funded, depending on how things play out. Scenario 3 is very similar. The guardrail is plus or minus 0.5%. So again, a pretty tight guardrail on that. And then this is one where we built in a floor of the contribution. So the plan has to be at least 90% funded before the contribution rate begins to go down. Scenario 4 is that reset that I talked about. And the 30-year reset is to using the level dollar approach. And I'm just going to say this about one more item about the level dollar approach. What's really intriguing about it to me is that under a level percent of pay approach, that payment is increasing every year. If you use level dollar payments, theoretically, our payroll is going to increase and our payments towards the unfunded accrued liability will remain stable. And so it's actually decreasing as a percent of payroll. And so that helps take some pressure off of rate increases going forward. Slide 23, scenario 5. This is more of the hands-on approach. This is where we know we need to get to, we're at 18.62. We know we need to get up a couple percent. And so we say, we're going to increase the rates by 1.5% each year for the next 2 years. And then we're going to adopt the ADC policy with some different constraints on it. And I think one of the points that we're trying to make here is that once you get to that ADC level, it becomes a lot easier to manage it. The heavy lifting has to be done to get us from 18.62 to 20.61. And so once we're up at that point at which we're making that ADC contribution, the volatility is actually pretty low on your contribution rate. But the problem is getting from where we are today to that point in the next couple of years. Scenario 6, similar, but this is a reset to the 30-year level dollar. And then we also say we're going to manually get up to that actuarially determined contribution amount so that there is that budget stability. We know exactly what the contributions are going to be in the short term. So on slide 24, we've looked at these scenarios for the public employee plan, obviously, and we're showing 2 different sets of results. And the first set is what we're calling the median return or the 50th percentile of returns. That's basically assuming a 6.8% return every single year. That's kind of in its most basic terms. Our expectation is 6.8. So there's about a 50% chance that we could beat it. There's a 50% chance that we could be under it. And so we're looking right down the middle. The second way that we're looking at this is I put this pattern of volatile returns into the model to see how big swings in returns could affect the contribution rates every year going forward. And so on slide 25, we've just got some observations before we get into the actuaries' favorite big tables of numbers. The first item is the baseline scenario. Frankly, it doesn't perform well under any of even the volatile returns, that median scenario, simply because it's assuming that no one's coming in to grab that wheel and to make any sort of contribution changes. Manually increasing the rates over the next couple of years could add that stability, as we mentioned. And then I already made this point about the tighter the guardrails, the more it looks like a fixed rate plan than it does an ADC plan. But what you'll see here in a moment is that all of these ADC policies, they do significantly reduce that downside risk of the plan. It's going to put some more certainty on the point at which we approach fully funded for the PE plan. So on 26, this is the table of results. It's almost indistinguishable between scenarios 1 and 6 when you're just looking at the middle of the road scenario, where every one of them gets 6.8% every year. You can see that each and every one of them, we're hitting our policy goals of being 100% funded within 30 years. And the growth is just a little bit quicker. You can see that in the scenarios that have the tighter guardrail, so like scenario 2 relative to scenario 1, you see that scenario 2's funded ratio grows a little bit slower because there may be some points at which you need some contribution changes, and that guardrail is kicking in, so it's delaying the funding of the plan just slightly. Well, you can see that under this median scenario, they all look pretty good, and they all meet our goal of being 100% funded. On 27, you look at here's the contribution rates and what those look like. And again, we're at 18.62 now, and we know we need to get up a little bit higher than that to meet that actuarially determined amount. And so you look at scenario 1, for example. This is the one where you just allow the ADC to operate. You eventually get up to 19.5% in 2025, and then it caps out at 21.6 in 2028, and then you can see it starts to come down a little bit, which is nice because you get the impact of that funding. You're starting to feel the impact of that second tier of benefits that are second tier of members that are earning benefits that are slightly lower than some of our older members. and that contribution rate starts to come down. And you can see that in all the scenarios, when we reach that 100% funded, that rate will automatically drop down to something that's really close to the normal cost, or somewhere around 11%. On slide 28, very similar chart here, and this is with the volatile asset returns. And again, you can notice, say on scenario 1 and 2, I mean, they all look very similar here. So they're all going to operate, in a rather similar basis. And mainly that's because we have this ADC policy in place that's making up for those good years and for those bad years. So the contribution rate is adjusting itself. And we see that a lot more clear here on slide 29, where we see the contribution rates, are going up and down and adjusting to that good or bad experience. You can see that scenario 2, that's the one with the pretty tight constraint. Scenario 2 and scenario 3 have tight constraints. You can see how those lag behind a little bit from scenario 1. And so that's why the funding is a little bit delayed. But, again, the key takeaway here is, even with stressing this with super volatile returns, we have enough mechanisms in place, either through the guardrails or through the asset smoothing and all of that, to in the layering of the amortization bases, to not have a tremendous amount of volatility or these changes in these rates year over year. So I'll pause there. See if there's any questions or discussions on any of these scenarios.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I look at your various scenarios and try to pick out which one has the best of every world in it and end up in the sweet spot, I keep looking at 2 and 5 as probably being some of the best in terms of your funding ratio and when you would hit that 100%, as well as the contribution rate in scenario 2 really stays the lowest. It never crests the 21%. But in your opinion, if you just were handed the magic wand in my question, which scenarios do you think find the greatest balance of achieving the best of every world with the least amount of pain on the public employee?
That is the
and
question.
that question's open to either of you at the table.
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, I think in the end, to protect employees as well as city and town budgets, as well as the state budget, I'm frankly a little more concerned about local budgets. Remember that this plan is 23% state employees, but 77% local, roughly. And employees have been buffered, and we've had vacancy rates and we've had compensation issues. I think I favor a policy with the tighter guardrails. I really do. 0.5% every 2 years. That'd be 25 basis points for the employee, 25 basis points for the employer. That doesn't upset budget departments too much, doesn't upset employees too much. It does slow the plan down, and Paul's exactly right. It operates a little more like a fixed rate plan, and that you don't get to the promised land as quickly. And in a volatile environment, you could find yourself a little more behind the power curve than you might like. But remember, we're all still here. If we needed to do something to intervene to take a leap forward because we'd fallen too far behind, we could. But I would favor a scenario like that, which I think was scenario number 3, or something similar to that. Just because we're kind of new to this, and I wouldn't want to put too much on the mechanism, and I think that kind of a tight guardrail might work a little bit better. The pension administrator in me says, "Oh no, we want the money as quick as we can," but I'm also I'm a former city budget administrator. I'm a state employee. You got to look at all these other aspects. I think we all do. So Scenario number 3 is my vote. All up to you.
Mr. Wood?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to get my free lunch taken away. No, I think to Dave's point, the guardrails, I think that's an important policy decision, something that needs to be in there, whether it's a 0.5% or 1%. Really, that's, I mean, you all are the experts, you know, you all see the budgets more than I do, and you have to understand how everything fits together. And so I think two or three would be, would put you in a much better position than you are today. And so if it's, you know, a 0.5% or 1% every 2 years, I think that the outcomes are going to be a whole lot better than what we're sitting at today.
So your answer is 2 or 3, and I'm going to call that 2.5.
Follow up, Representative? Further questions? Thank you for that candid opinion. Keep going.
Well, Madam Chairman,
I'm sorry, Representative.
and I'm not sure if this question is for the director, or maybe for the committee. Let's imagine we say we like scenario 2 or we like scenario 3. What's our next step? Do we try to get a bill draft going to
Yeah,
have this done this February?
I think so.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, I'd also point out, we've had a lot of discussions with LSO. We've had several meetings. I'm so appreciative of Don Richards' time on this, as well as State Budget Office. We've modeled a lot of different scenarios. What if the markets are really, really bad? What if the markets are really, really good? There's a whole lot more that we've done that we're not going to put you through. But Don challenged us and wanted us to back test everything, and we've done that. The results are pretty much what Paul has. They are exactly what Paul has briefed you on. Is that in the end, all the ADC policies perform better than our status quo. So to me, that says there's an opportunity for progress here, but there's a lot of policy considerations as we move forward. So I think we'll talk some of this back testing. That's what these slides. When we talk about back testing, that means looking back in time. Had we had the ADC policy in place, how would it have performed during those market conditions and those mortality changes and all that other stuff? And then we tried to project that forward as well. So we projected it backwards and forwards. That's this next section of the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this should go fairly quickly. So we're on slide 31 right now. And again, asked to back test. So basically what we did is we assumed that the board's funding policy was put into place on January 1, 2013. And then we started moving forward. And we projected forward 10 years, compared that projection to where we are today, and then projected forward from that point. And so on slide 32, this is our projected funded ratio point. And so again, going back to 2013, we have the same exact starting point. And the orange line there is the baseline amount. So that's the funded ratio, assuming the contribution rates that were in effect at the time. The gray line on top of that orange line there, that's assuming that the actuarially determined contribution amount would have been made. And so you can see that the actuarially determined contribution amount would have been a little bit higher than our rates that were in effect. And that's why after that 10 years, you end up with a little bit of a higher funded ratio. It's really not that much, but you end up with a higher funded ratio. Then fast forwarding the next 10 years, if you put in volatile returns, you stay on your actuarially determined contribution policy, or you stay on your fixed rate policy. You can see that those lines start to widen quite a bit. And you're talking a difference between, 81% and somewhere around 92 or 93% after another 10 years. And so initially, the first 5-10 years of an actuarially determined contribution process, you're not making a whole lot of progress. But once you hit that tipping point after about 10 years, that's really when you start to see this funding happen. And it's really showing itself out. If we extend this out even further, that top line would continue to go to 100% funded by about 2043, while that line on the bottom there would lag behind. It wouldn't reach 100% funded for another 30 years. But as we've talked about in the past, that comes with increased contributions. And so on slide 33, you can see that orange line, those are the contributions that were in effect over that period from 2013 to 2023. And that gray line on top would have been what the actuarially determined contribution would have looked like. And you can see that there's a couple of times in which that contribution amount jumps up. And so you see in 2018, 2019, that area there, that was an experience study that was performed. And that's when we changed quite a few assumptions at that point, including coming down to a 7% discount rate.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I might say that was a big one. We went from assumption of 7.75 to 7%. That's 75 basis points. That had a big impact.
But again, as I talked about earlier today, I don't really expect to see us taking 75 basis points out of our return assumption anytime soon. I mean, I'm not going to say that with certainty. Obviously, we'll repeat that many times. That's not set in stone. But the likelihood of that happening is a lot lower than it was, 5-10 years ago. And so when we do this forward testing on the ADC policy with volatile returns, you can see that, the rate, it goes up and down, and, there's some volatility there. But, once you've hit that ADC point, the ride is fairly smooth, is relatively smooth, and there's never a huge jump in any given year. And it tends to will oscillate over time. And so that's really the key message on slide 34, just the takeaway. Once we get there, the ride is relatively smooth. And then as long as we don't have any massive assumption changes, as long as they don't figure out a way for us all to live to 150 years old tomorrow, then the ride could be, it will most likely be very smooth, even in the face of those volatile investment returns. So that's all we had in terms of prepared remarks today, but.
Great work. Thank you. Thank you for the options and thanks for the thorough presentation. Big decisions. Questions from the committee? Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm quite giddy about this, as the presenter started out saying he is. My question is for Director Swindell. We've done about 4.5% of increases in the last 11 years, looking at previous documents in a day. In doing so, have we moved the funding ratio? Had we, doing the back testing, it shows had we been on the ADC plan, we'd have gone from 77 to 82%. In the action we have taken, were we able to, how much did we move that funding percentage? 4.5% increase, did we move it 5% better? If my question's making sense.
Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, the answer is we stayed stagnant. We stayed in the mid 70% range. The funding ratio over the last 10 years in this plan, with all the changes that we've made, has been from 76 to 78%.
Madam Chairman. But the reason that is that because you went from 7 7/8 down to 7. So we didn't remain stagnant. Had we stayed stagnant, we'd be underwater right now. We'd have about $4 billion unfunded liability.
Madam Chairman, Representative Nicholas, Representative Walters, yeah, that's exactly true. We stayed stagnant because every one of those contribution increases was swallowed up by an assumption change. Either mortality was increased, mortality decreased, people lived longer, or the big thing is the assumed rate of return. And so the progress to this point has been, those rate increases kept us stable versus falling down, which is where we would have been had we not done that.
If you just make better forecasts, we'd be okay.
That's right. I would say, Madam Chairman, that is typical across median pension plans across the United States. The median plan is funded just a little less than ours, about 73%. They've been stuck in the low 70s for 10 years. We've been stuck in the high 70s for 10 years for exactly the same reasons. Everybody has increased contribution rates. Everybody still is in there. It hasn't moved the funding needle because of the assumption changes. So the real question is, from here, are we through most of that? I think we are. As Paul said, no guarantees. But going forward, the plan will start to grow. But it is also true that we'd be a little better off today had we been a little quicker on pulling the trigger on some of those things. But as I said before, in many ways, the state of Wyoming has been a fixed rate system, but we've managed it pretty well. We have had increases as necessary. We've done the right thing. It isn't that we haven't. It's sometimes been a little slower, but that's the nature of it. You have to have a problem, study it. You know, it doesn't change automatically.
Director, thank you. Representative Larson.
So in the purest sense of the term, and you look at our fixed rate plan, it's more of a hybrid than a pure fixed rate, because we respond, not like we do at the ADC, but we respond in this committee every time you guys bring this emergency that we're, and fair enough, but then we respond and outside what you would think the traditional lines of a fixed plan would be. Is that fair?
Director.
Madam Chairman, Representative, that's absolutely fair. It might be described as not a fixed rate system, but a manual system. And states can be successful with that. In some of the ground papers that I've provided to LSO on this thing, Keith Brainerd is the chief of research at the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, which is basically an organization of all the major state plans. And he's studied all this stuff. And he makes a point that in the end, it doesn't really matter whether you're a fixed rate system or a ADC system. You have to do what you need to do. And there are examples of fixed rate systems that are contributing the full amount of their actuarially determined contributions. Our neighbor South Dakota is an example of that. There are a couple of examples of states with what appears to be in statute of very firm requirements to fund the ADC, but they have found ways to evade or get around that. I won't mention any names, but it rhymes with New Jersey and Illinois, two of the more notorious pension systems that have had some funding issues because of that. In the end, Keith points out one of his papers, it's a pretty good quote. In the end, there is no substitute for will and discipline to properly fund a public pension. And for the most part, Wyoming has done that.
Am I right that when we made some of the changes back between 2012 up until now, we also tinkered with the benefits? In addition to just putting more money in and out, we just reduced a few things here, up there that just kind of, once again, we're just kind of tinkering with it to tip it up.
Do we like to exercise our control in every little item? Director Swindle.
In the public employee plan, nationally, there are basically three flavors of pension reform that was necessitated after the great financial crisis, among other things. The first one was contribution rates. We've talked a lot about that. The second one was benefits. And we did have a second tier of benefits in the public employee plan that took place in 2012. And then the third element was COLAs. And various states had various flavors of how they were going to adjust cost of living allowances. And Wyoming adopted a policy that basically eliminated COLAs until we were fully funded. The combination of all those things is pretty impactful. The benefit decrease in tier one hasn't really shown up that much in our liabilities yet, but we're about 11 years into it, and it's about 10 years where it starts to bite a little bit. And so the liabilities that we have today are already starting to be affected in a material amount by the benefit reductions that were imposed back in 2012. So it isn't that those benefit reductions don't impact. They do. They just take a long time to play out because it affects only new employees at the start. Eventually, it tips over. More than half of the employees in the PE plan today are tier 2. We crossed over, I think, in 2020. But the new employees, they don't have much liability. So your liability is still mostly with tier 1 people, but that is starting to change. So yes, this committee, your predecessors, my predecessors, yeah, we changed benefits. Not so much in the smaller public safety plans for some good reasons, but in tier one and in public employee plan, we did.
Further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. We will move on to our agenda item. Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we leave this, so we don't just leave the topic hanging indefinitely.
No, we're gonna move through anyone else in public comment, of course.
Oh,
We're just gonna move through it just like we have been all morning.
I thought when you indicated next agenda item, I thought we were moving away
Yeah.
from this topic. My
On
mistake.
the subsection of the bullet points, that's how detailed we are on this agenda. It's not a free for all when I'm chairing. Okay. Is there any other, Mr. Hibbard, did you want to provide any feedback or comments? You're listed here as well. You've heard a lot of the discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate Director Swindell listening through the process because the outcome is supported by the State Budget Department as far as how we'll manage the budgets. So we're good on that end of it.
Thank you. All right. Holly, yeah, Scott, please come forward. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Richards has asked me to just share with the committee that LSO punchline here is that if the ADC increase of 1.99% were to be adopted, an estimate of the general fund impact for that for a biennium, bottom line, $9 million, as well as schools cost would be 40 million. The 9 million is assuming the 80% employer pickup of the whole contribution and the 20% for employees is maintained.
And that's at that 1.9% increase.
1.99. Correct. Biannual.
We don't like those numbers, Ms. Scott. We'd like you to repeat them because. So actually, one more time, if you would just repeat that again,
Yes.
avoid people having to rewind.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chairman, the general fund amount needed for the 1.99% increase is 9 million. If the current pattern of the employer paying 80% of the contribution and the employee paying 20% of the contribution is maintained. And additionally, the school cost for biennium is 40 million.
Take a minute.
Paid out at what percentage? I mean, it's different by school district, is it not, on who covers?
Madam Chairman and Co-Chairman Nicholas, I believe that the school districts can vary their amount that they're picking up. Many of them pattern the executive branch, and Director Swindell may have a comment there as well.
As he looks for that, Representative Stiff.
Madam Chairman, so just for comparison purposes, that's the price tag if we adopted a 1.99% increase to the contribution rate, but otherwise leave the statutory framework in place. Is that correct?
Madam Chairman and Representative Stiff, that is correct.
Okay, Madam
So
Chairman, follow-up question.
Follow.
So if we pick scenario 2 or scenario 3 and go with that, do we have a number for what that means
That's right.
for dollar amount?
Yeah, so scenario 2 and 3, which is what we're considering, what are those dollar amounts? And we'll give everyone a minute to do some math. And Director Swindell is still looking, you're just fine. Any additional questions from the committee? We have time, so.
So I do have a question, Madam Chair. I think in some of the increases that we've done over the past decade, we would, just for that increase. So if we had an increase of 0.5% in 2024, and we split it 50 to the employee and 50% to the employer, And that tinkered with the, so that just is a percentage or trajectory of, that modifies it down to 81.5% or something like that versus the 85% to 80%. Is that accurate? And in terms of actually the 80-20 versus, or 85-15 on employer versus employee. Because it's just my recollection that we've done that in the past on a pay increase, that we split it half to the employees, half to the employer, still allowing the employer to assume that other quarter percent if they choose to.
Ms. Scott, if you know.
Madam Chairman and Co-Chairman Nicholas, could you please repeat the question for me?
So if just work, what's the process if we want to say do 0.5% in 2024, 0.5% in 2025? The employee is responsible for half, the employer is responsible half. Now on its face, although the employer can always kick in if they choose to. I think we've done that before on the big plan. And so what would the values then, would that turn it into 4.5 million each year for that contribution then in terms of general fund dollars?
Madam Chairman and Co-Chairman Nicholas, I would like to clarify, are you saying that you would like to increase the employee required contribution out of pocket of 3.68% by 0.25%?
Well, it's
to 3.93.
It's 0.25% of the total of just the increase. And so it's, I don't know the answer to that. What is that number, that percentage, or how is it calculated? That's part of my question.
Okay.
How about we come back to that question?
Okay.
Give everybody a little bit of time to process it. Director Swindell, do you have a question? Do you have an answer to his original question regarding
Well, I think so.
schools?
In your packet, there was an Excel spreadsheet on the public employee plan and what various contribution rate increases would cost and some detail. Does people have that in their packet? Seeing some nods, but some not. Yes. Yes, sir. So in the end, if you increase the contribution rate of currently 18.62, the total, it goes up by 1%. That costs somebody $20,609,000. The state of Wyoming share, based upon the current employee count, would be 4,703,000. Now that's assuming, like for example, the state was going to pick it all up. All right, we're talking about the state maybe picking up 0.25% and having 1/4 of that. So have those numbers. That would be about the total bill would, for a 50 basis point increase, would be about $10.3 million across all entities. The state share would be $2,350,000. And if that was only half of that, because we're going to share that with the employees, that would be what, $1,200,000.
Yeah.
1/4 of that number that's provided in the
Right.
spreadsheet. Never do the math on the fly.
Correct.
Ask any lawyer.
And the bill to schools, as Polly pointed out, the full bill for, well, anyway, staying on the 1%, there's about a $10 million bill to the schools, and 25 basis points would be 1/4 of that, or about 2.5 million.
And those are annual numbers?
Those are annual numbers. So,
All right. I want to,
so before we get to maybe we just sort of,
yeah, let's slow down a little bit. And
Mhm.
Co-Chairman Nicholas is heading us down a different path, which we may circle back to, but I want to get the committee conceptually understanding where we are as Co-Chairman Nicholas is swimming in the faster current here. So Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So that's the information regarding the state in that Excel spreadsheet that you'd find on page 23 of 35.
Representative, Chairman Nethercott, to Representative Larson, yes, that's correct. These are annual numbers here.
And annual numbers. And then can I just ask, Madam Chairman, clarification in column 3 and 4, you got a 2% increase and a 1.9 contribution. So I'm just interested why a 1.99 and a 2%.
Director?
When I ask our finance department to prepare these products, so just give me a product that covers all the scenarios so that we might be able to answer questions in a hearing.
Okay.
And so I had her do 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, anything that was possible. On the law enforcement plan, we had 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, and then the ADC amount of 6.21. This follows the same pattern. Give me a 1%, give me a 2%, and then give me the ADC. Of course, the 2% is almost the same as 1.99, but it's just for completeness. And a little bit of, I have some nerds in
Just one.
WRS, including myself.
To the nerds on this committee, any follow-up questions? Let's give it a minute, everyone to process it.
There you go.
All right, seeing no further questions. Is that accurate? Sure, we'll come back. Any additional, Ms. Scott?
Madam Chairman and Chairman Nicholas, if I understand, I'll just restate the question that I have worked on. Co-Chairman Nicholas wanted to know what the cost would be of a 0.5% increase that was split between the employer and the employee. Okay, so I believe that would be a general fund cost to the employers of 2.2 million. Okay, and then with schools, that would be and that's a biennial number. And with schools, that would be a $5 million biennial number.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hibbert, circling back to you, any comments?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, I don't think there probably is any, but we'll go to public comment at this time. Any public comment on this? All right, seeing no public comment is closed. Committee, kind of back to you. As Representative Stiff asked and pointed out, I think next procedural steps is to do a bill draft. And then I think, in my mind, obviously this is an evaluation of numbers and then understanding the effect of those percentages and numbers under scenario 2 or 3, and then further tweaking as Co-Chairman Nicholas is heading down. He's running, we're walking. That's like what will happen. So I think maybe in December, potentially we can have a bill draft where then we can manipulate some of those numbers. So I wouldn't get too preoccupied or fixated on those numbers, as those obviously will be further evaluated in December and January. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Representative Larson?
So, Madam Chairman, as we approach this, just a little perspective, and I appreciate you bringing up December, January, and February. But in my mind, I don't know that it's even will have reached its maturity even that end. We may want to take the time, if we're not comfortable, then to really flesh this out and make sure that the people impacted by it understand what we're doing. That might be another cycle, another interim. Am I seeing that differently than you?
I think that would be prudent to allow for another interim to take place in light of the fact it's almost November. That said, I do think it is a big enough issue And it's up to this committee. You don't have to move a bill draft now, but if we did, at least it'd get published and allow the agencies to start looking at it in the cities, towns and counties as well. And start getting more interest about that. So certainly questions for the committee to decide upon. Co-Chairman Nicholas?
I think someone's got control of my button because it keeps turning red. Yeah, I knew that. So, Madam, I have a proposed bill that I'd like to submit, but I want a couple comments first. Number one, no matter what happens, we need to add more money into the system. And as we've learned from the director from the past, the sooner you put the money in, the further it goes. So, and I kind of like the concept that's presented to us on the ADC, but we don't have to get there yet. And that requires some fairly substantial statutory changes. So what I would suggest is we do something that we have done in the past, which is we do a 0.5% that would go into effect in July of 24 and a 0.5% that would go into effect of July of 25. So we get 1% up. And then during next interim, we can work a bill if we choose to that goes to the ADC. We can also, we'll be able to track rate of returns because most folks I think are suggesting now that we're going to be in a high interest environment for at least the next 3 to 4 years, which is going to help all of us. And it's going to help the retirement system because we actually might get more than 6.8% over that course of time. And so we'll be able to adopt this or add in with sideburns, but it seems to me we ought to get the ball on the road to start saving money. And so that's my suggestion is it's a simple bill. It's a 50/50. How we split it up, if it's half employee, half employer, or 80/20, that's something we can talk about in the draft bill. But I think with the bill, I always try to do 50/50 just because I think that the employer has to have skin in the game as we move, or the employee has to have skin in the game. But that's up to the committee, but a draft bill moving forward. So we start saving more money for this fund, I think is just a good idea.
I'll second that motion.
So I'm going to go back to what the motion is. You want to do a motion to increase the public employee contribution 50/50 between the employer and the employee by a 0.5% for 2 years. Okay, and that was seconded by Representative Stith. Discussion on the motion for a bill draft. That's what we're gonna do. So no further discussion? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? No. All right, that motion has passed. Co-Chairman Nicholas, you mentioned the need to appropriate money into the fund, which was not part of the motion for the bill draft. Did you have a second motion that you wanted to do now or wait until December? Oh, just the appropriation associated with that, not a separate lump sum sock money into the retirement fund.
Right.
Okay. All right. Representative Larson.
And so I'm looking for guidance from you, Madam Chairman, because I'd like to continue the conversation or the discussion that you brought up on this ADC matter, as I do think that we ought to start the process of having a bill draft looking at scenario 2 or 3 and how that may potentially look. Is that something that you can just make a request to do, or do we have to follow the similar process?
It's my preference to have the will of the committee.
Okay, so that's my motion.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on the motion? Representative Walters?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think to add to his motion, I think we should start with scenario 3 as our basis for the bill draft. And then if we go to Brian or Counselor Fuller's memo and to the bottom of page 1, so that in the bill draft, we could start answering some of the questions. I guess as I start through his entire memo, the first bullet point, I would leave the contribution language the same in this first draft. The second, I'd ignore the first two. And then if you get to the bottom of the page, who makes the calculations? I think WRS in consultation with their actuarial is how I would propose in this initial draft. And then calculation should be finalized by the end of the fiscal year or the beginning of the new fiscal year, something to that effect. And the calculation should be made annually. And he has lots of other questions, but they get addressed through the usage of scenario number 3. But I just, so that the committee knows where the bill is going, I propose these various ideas and love the discussion beyond that. But it gives the committee an idea of our jumping in point because we're feeling froggy.
Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Henderson. Further discussion,
Yep.
clarification from Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Representative Walters. So is the intent then for the initial bill draft to assume rates would change annually instead of biannually, which I think was presented in the presentation?
I think I understood it to be an annual change, but if it's biannual based on I would follow the presentation, I guess was my goal.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, Representative Walters, in our discussions with LSO and the Budget Department, a biannual change works better. We would calculate this annually. But in that one chart that had a little calendar on it, it just would be an off-year calculation for information, so you kind of know where we're going. But we would only adjust rates in our scheme every 2 years.
Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, further discussion on this topic. Mr. Wood, are you excited about this?
I'm going to sleep like a baby tonight.
All right, thank
Madam
you.
Chairman, I just have to say this is a really good step, I think. You know where we need to go, so we'll have a simple bill draft. We'll get in that direction. And then we can study it further if we want to turn this over to more of an administrative mechanism. And we have time to do that, knowing that we're moving out in the right direction. I think it's a really good combination.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for your time and preparation today. Really appreciate allowing us to make an informed decision for all of our retirees. So thank you. Committee, are you ready to go to the next topic? Okay, we are on 3:15 topic. That's right, the 3:15 agenda item topic, and it's only 2:15. All right, Director Hibbard, good to see you. We are now on state ARPA expenditures and the IIJA awards update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First thing I'd like to do, just introduce myself for the testimony for the record. I'm Kevin Hibbard.
Glass House?
I'm Kevin Hibbard. I'm the Director of the State Budget Department. With me today, to my left, is Christine Imminger. She's a senior budget analyst, and Regina Mina as well. This is your ARPA team for the State Budget Department sitting in front of you. This is what we have.
To the state ARPA team. They are.
Very impressive set of outcomes that we pulled together on this. I want to be brief today because I understand the importance of brevity. And I'm going to throw out some high priority statistics. Remember, John Richards said, look at the yellow lines. This is what you need to know today. First of all, through the investment process that was navigated by the State Budget Department and the Treasurer's Office, the ARPA fund has netted us through June 30th of this year, $17.7 million in the general fund. And that's exists in your profile as we discussed yesterday. Of the $1.168 billion, we have spent $531 million. One half of the ARPA dollars have gone out the door. So we're still going to have inflationary pressure across the state of Wyoming as we continue to spend those ARPA dollars. ARPA redeployment range. And this is the topic that I want to focus on today very straight. ARPA redeployment, the range as we see it now is somewhere between $30 and $60 million. I can't overstress the importance of us collaborating together on the redeployment of ARPA. If we don't get it obligated properly, it'll go unspent. So on the 8th of September, Governor Gordon's office issued guidance to the agencies for the redeployment of ARPA unobligated and unexpended funds. We're collecting that information. You will receive a governor's letter with that information. And in that governor's letter, you will see governor's recommendations for how to proceed with those redeployments of those ARPA funds.
September 7th.
Excuse me?
When do we receive that letter?
You will receive the letter on the normal time that we normally get governor's letters. So sometime most likely in December for the governor's letters.
We don't always get them in December.
That's why I'm hedging, Representative Nicholas. I'm not new to this ballgame.
Representative Larson.
Kevin, I'm just trying to ask some clarity on what the letter will provide. Will it provide specific of the projects, or is it more categories of the type of projects?
It'll be as granular as we can make it. There's going to be specificity because it's going to have to be understood what the impacts of those are. So yes.
Representative Stitt.
Madam Chairman, so Director Hibbard, so these funds that can be redeployed, these are direct ARPA funds, correct?
That is correct. And I will say there'll be a small amount of revenue replacement dollars that went unspent, but that's not the big case here. The $30 to $60 million is in fact ARPA direct dollars.
So
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I need a little clarity. I was thinking ARPA had to be allocated by the end of 2024 or end of 2023. That was this year. And so we had to have it done by this year, and this next budget wouldn't allow us to get that done. So I need a timing
Director.
Madam Chair.
reset.
Yes, this is in my comments. So I'll go right to those key dates. June 30th of 2023, or excuse me, 2024. This upcoming June, the state law says you have to have it contracted. That's important because it's not just the federal government that we're dealing with, it's your will that you have said, have it contracted. Now we know that there's some things that we have to do with the local governments to actually see that we have a contract in hand by June 30th, and we're working on that. We have weekly meetings with local governments and subrecipients, but we know that we have to identify that, hey, by June 30th of this year, due to your will, we want to have those contracted. Very important step that we're normally not discussing. Then, Representative Walters, to your point, by December 31st of 2024, that becomes not this coming December, but the next December, we have to have it fully obligated with under the rules of the federal government. We would like to have that all accomplished before October with the flexibility that we hope that you provide us then so that we can see to it that we get all that done. We have to have the federal law met by December 31st of 2024.
obligated just means directed towards a project. It doesn't have to be expended.
Right now, the best way for me to phrase that is we have a contract, but there's issues associated with that. And I'll point those out. One, the state of Wyoming has, for example, the state budget teams you see here. We have labor that we don't normally encumber or contract. So we will be working with SAO in some fashion or another to say that, hey, the will is been attended to. And really the federal government is a little bit soft in what they consider to be an obligation. But we want to work with the U.S. Treasury, and we want to make sure that our processes meet that in the fullest. And the easiest way to do that is say, I'm in possession of a contract.
So, Madam Chair,
Co-chairman?
so my issue, Kevin, is if we can get that letter like before the first week of our week of JAC in December, so that we have the opportunity as a committee to review the governor's requests. And then over the interim, and take it whatever actions we want to. If we want to add or subtract or modify the governor's recommendations, that gives us time to do it.
So we have a process in place to try to get that information. And as soon as we can get that information to you, I believe the governor would be willing to have that. That's his call to make. But I don't see any reason why you don't want to share the information with you, because this is such a dynamic problem for us to solve. We need to get on it. And it's not about the interim. We have this session to get this resolved, and we have to get in place and with the redeployment of the ARPA direct dollars. And we also have to have fallback positions put in place with the necessary level of flexibility. Health and human services are key, water's key, but there's probably going to be some matching things that we're going to have to discuss to get the water projects over the fence. But we're not resistant to holding back the information for you, Senator, or
Yeah, I'm
excuse
just
me,
trying
Representative
to think of
Nicholas.
it from our standpoint, what would work, because to expedite it and also to have our fair share of time to analyze it and decide what we want to do.
We want to spend the money.
We want to see that this is done in the fashion, in the best interest of the state of Wyoming. And that means if you need the information sooner, we'll do our level best to do that. It's one of those scenarios where you do have a risk reward on the earlier you process the information, the less valuable it is. So there is a need for us to wait. I have some numbers in my possession now, but they haven't been fully vetted with all the agencies, which is another thing that's very important that we do as well, is go through that process. And we are going through that process, and that process started by the governor on September 8th. I enjoy the fact that you guys are in the Joint Appropriations Committee is in support of this process. Is important to us.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Director Hibbert. So then, once we sit down and come to meeting of minds and it passes the legislature, then you still got to go back and go through the process of SLIB approval like we have on everything else. Are we circumventing that, or will it continue along that process? How do you envision that?
I believe all those processes will stay in place with the intent of us doing our level best to get the obligations in possession by the end of October of 2024, knowing the deadline is December 31st. Yes.
Madam Chairman, so then time is of the essence.
Time is of the essence.
Let's also just be thinking about ways to streamline that process more efficiently, change what we've done in the event that makes sense. Just no suggestions, just think about it.
Those suggestions are welcome. And one of the things about the timetable that I suggested to you about the state, June 30th of 2024, that's a game changer if people are not paying attention to it. That eclipses, it gets redeployed. But we need to have places to redeploy it, and we need to have flexibility when the end of the ball game comes. We're going to need flexibility. I will give you an example with CARES. At the very last day, we moved the system, the machine, processes around to where we were able to take advantage of the Department of Corrections' ability to expend dollars. In that moment in time, we recovered, I would say, $8 million. So we need to be able to position ourselves for that flexibility to say, yes, we've got it all obligated. And then by the December 31st of 2026, we have to have it spent.
Does anyone want to exercise some oversight right now?
Madam Chairman.
Just Representative Stick.
So Director Hibbard, the sense I get for this is that we may not have the luxury of using the SLIB process that we used with Senate File 66. We may just have to make direct allocations. So if Representative Larson wants a hospital in Riverton, we may just have to directly allocate it.
Representative Larson, how do you feel about removing SLIB?
I think you keep SLIB in place.
You know, one-
And Madam Chairman, the reason I say that is because one of the things that we have allowed the public, the municipalities, the agencies, everybody to do is to have a fair shot at the apple with the programs that are available. And when we start making when we get down to this and not provide that opportunity, I think that concerns me.
Madam
So
Chair.
long as there's a fair process.
Right.
Director Hibbard?
Madam Chair, and I do believe that there's projects in the pipeline that didn't have the funding to them or the matching available. So when I talked about water, important to keep everybody involved. And I also believe that we may have to look at how we can facilitate getting the money, the federal dollars out the door with the state of Wyoming working together with the local governments on seeing that those dollars get leveraged.
Further discussion? Last chance to exercise some oversight. Representative Sherwood?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering if we could request, and I realize OSLI is not in the room or from SLIB. I think an updated list of what we saw maybe a year ago in terms of applications for those, say, like local government projects, water projects. And at some point we ran out of funding, right? And so there was still grant applications requests on the list, but didn't score high enough to get the funding. But I'm wondering if we could get a better idea of like what the demand was for some of those, what was left on the list, who may reapply if this was reopened. Thank you.
Madam Chair, that's one of the things that we'll be looking at as far as once we get the redeployment number, the statistic, then how do we apply that in a governor's recommendation? So that's fair game for everybody.
Another follow-up question? All right, seeing none. Any public comment on this topic? Oh, Representative Larson?
So I think, in fairness, our Wyoming ARPA team was in front of us and has done an incredible job. But I think one of the time-consuming things, Madam Chairman, you brought up, is this review from CLA that often really did take some time. Does our team feel like that they have enough experience now in looking at the projects and understand Treasury guidance that we can speed that up a little bit, maybe sometimes not have to make that request from CLA? Or
Madam Chair. Yes, so today I said the state budget department ARPA team, and I don't want to let anybody out there that has worked really hard on this process to think for a second that it didn't take the entire enterprise. To the point of Clifton Larson Allen and our team's development, my answer is yes, we are much better positioned today than we were a year ago. We are much better positioned than we were 6 months ago. We just know it inside and out. And I think that's through pain and suffering.
All right, well, with that, committee, final questions before we go to public comment on this topic? All right, public comment on this topic? Anybody online? Mr. Garrett?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Richard Garrett. I'm a little reluctant and a little humbled to be speaking with you again, but I've got to applaud Team ARPA for their work. I recognize that there's both philosophical and practical issues at play here. And I hope the philosophical issues don't get in the way of practical. We've seen a lot of benefit from the repatriation of this money back to the state of Wyoming for the benefit of so many communities across the state. I've attended SLIB meetings where they've had to deny extraordinarily worthy projects simply because of the scoring process that you, Representative Sherwood, mentioned. So I urge you to expedite, to facilitate, to trust, to collaborate, and to encourage, and bring these dollars to Wyoming for the benefit of future generations. So with that.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett.
Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Garrett? All right, seeing none. I don't think there's any other public comment. We will close out this topic. Committee, how are you doing for a break? You want a 10-minute break, 5-minute break? Nod your heads, yes or no. Representative Walters?
Question, are we going to visit about IIJA before we move on? As there was a slash on the agenda, not just ARPA slash, still reading.
You are the best. Yes. I got too excited about the 30 to 60. My mind was wandering. All right, let's go to IIJA, please.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. My name is Christine Eminger. I'm a senior budget analyst with the State Budget Department, and I'm also the ARPA project lead. Just a couple points that I have today. I just want to follow up on some ARPA items. We did receive the 2023 interim final rule flexibilities for the ARPA program. Surprise, surprise, they are not that flexible to our benefits. So we have done our review. We do not feel that some of those are worth it unless it is an emergency disaster relief effort. Director Hibbard mentioned the current status of our efforts regarding the ARPA redeployment. We are continuing to work with the project leads in those agencies to identify and track those potential available dollars that could be redeployed. We are continuing to collaborate with the governor's office on this effort. It is very, very significant. We are continuing to do subrecipient monitoring meetings to push out any new federal guidance, any new federal regulations that might impact a department's projects or ARPA program. There are several people that we have told and have been working with, one of them being State Parks and Department of Health, to try to just speed up everything along. We're trying to get those appropriations that were given under Senate File 66 and House Bill 195, some immediate priorities so that we can get them through and get the slate cleared for this next upcoming session. When it comes to the capital project funds, $109 million, we had 4 applications go to the United States Treasury. 3 of them have been approved. The 3rd approval was just received 2 days ago for the Central Wyoming College for the Jackson Outreach Center. We have been working diligently with the state construction department, folks over at A&I, people within the governor's office, and the CWC folks, stakeholders as well. We are very excited to be able to bring that to present to you today. That was for the new application. The other 2 applications that have been had prior approval for state libraries and the Wyoming Business Council, they are under review at this time. The state library received 7 applications. They only had a total award amount of $12.6 million from the United States Treasury. With the Wyoming Business Council, they received 116 applications. They only have a $70.5 million appropriation to work with. When it comes to these projects, we are currently working on an additional dashboard display so that we are able to track and display these expenditures on a public-facing website. We are also continuing to collaborate with the governor's office and their fiscal analysts on the rollout of this program. We have established a reimbursement process that we are ready to roll out and explain to those individuals who will be needing to use that reimbursement process. My 3rd and final thing is for the IIJA funds. We continue to update the dashboard with the most current listings that we are provided every Tuesday from FFIS, the Federal Funds Information for States. The governor's office, they have been reviewing requests for those matching general fund dollars for the IIJA funds. The one point that I do just want to make is that we are not able to give the general fund match until the applicant provides the award notification that comes in from the federal government. Once that federal award notification is provided to us, we will be the state budget department will be working with the governor's office to establish the B11 process or establish that funding through the B11 process and eventually subsequently notifying LSO's staff about that.
Oversight legislators. Anyone? Representative Sherwood.
If you know, if not, I can take it offline. One, thank you so much for your championing of these funds and getting them out to our communities. Kudos. Second, if you know, if any of the requirements around using ARPA or federal monies for affordable housing has been loosened or massaged, I would love to hear if there's an update in that area. Thank you.
At the time, right off the top of my head, I do not think that there has been any softening of those requirements. If anything, we've seen hardening of requirements or additional requirements being seen. I do know that the SLIB board, they saw some affordable housing applications, and we have been working with the OSLI staff on those.
Any further questions? Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. So for both of you, first, yeah, thank you, like everyone else. Thank you for your work. But now as these awards get done and going to your point, Kevin, about making sure that the things happen now on time, I take it you folks are following up with the award recipients on this about the need and the timeframes that are out there and the necessity now to get to contract as, you know, to make these time constraints, and you're making sure that they know that. Is there something we should all be doing about that, those of us that are working in these areas, or how's that playing out?
Do you have a self-help guide? Thank you, Director.
Madam Chairman, what you can do to help us is let your local governments know that the state budget department is out there and we're helping. We have meetings on a regular basis. We have ARPA development meetings. We also have subrecipient monitoring meetings. And those are important meetings. So if you have your local finance folks join us, we're going to help. And I'll just end it with this. Where a local government or the state of Wyoming is in harm's way is not following through their subrecipient reporting. It's a big deal. That's what's going to clobber you. But if you come in with an open mind, the state budget department, we will do everything we can to help facilitate you in that. That's what you can do to help. Get them in the room with us. We'll be happy to help.
Thank you.
Further questions? All right, seeing none, let's go to public comment. Seeing no public comment is closed. Thank you, Team ARPA. Appreciate your time and efforts. I see Director Obrecht is here. Give a minute as we move to our next agenda item, which is item 24, Capital Saturday Pilot Program. Hi, welcome. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Director Obrecht, welcome to JAC.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Appreciate it. We're all here with Director Tricia Bach and the LSO Visitor Services Manager, Rihanna Davidson, to discuss extended hours on the Capitol. And I think first Rihanna is going to tell us a little bit about how the summer pilot project went. And then Trish will talk a little bit about how it went on her side.
All right, Ms. Davidson, welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, it's nice to see you this afternoon. As you can see from the meeting materials that I had prepared, the Capital Saturday Visitation Pilot Program was a success. We were thrilled with the numbers that we saw and the enthusiasm that we heard from local residents and out-of-state residents about access on the weekends. As you'll see from the notes, the Capitol was open May 6th, the first Saturday in May through Labor Day. The volunteer docents started Memorial Day. And I would say, generally speaking, like I said, the volunteers heard great feedback from residents, from out-of-state visitors. I think mirroring the hours with the State Museum made a lot of sense for visitors that were in downtown Cheyenne, that we could collaboratively promote both institutions. And I think that they're definitely, I think for you to consider is an appetite to consider it on a permanent basis moving forward. I'm not sure, Director Matt, if you wanted to add anything else.
Ms. Director Bach.
Madam Chairwoman, I would echo what was said from LSO. It was a huge success, I think. We had a lot of concerns going in, maybe just on how it was going to work, and I think it worked beautifully. And the only thing I would say is that I get a little concerned if we're going to extend it past where we are, because we were a little thin along with Highway Patrol. You know, we have a trooper at the same time, but I think if we can get that worked out, I think this could be a very good program. I'd like to thank the LSO, and our office worked really well together, and the docents are wonderful. So we had two folks who were in the back of the room who traded off Saturdays, the one being Lori Gallus, which most of you already know. And the other is Brittany Bannister. And so those folks were switching off each Saturday, and we would like not to have to do that in the future, but we have some options to look at for that. We don't need their level to be really on a Saturday. So we have some options for that too, but it really went quite well. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you for alternating your Saturdays for the People's House. Appreciate your time and serving all of the people who wanted to visit our capital. So,
Madam Co-Chair.
Co-Chairman Nicholas.
So thank you. So Brianna and or Trish, I'm looking at the numbers, and you know, I'm down here quite a bit. And what I realize almost every time I'm here, people come in who don't register, who don't talk to the docents. And so is there any way we keep track of the actual total number of folks that come in versus just those who register or who go ahead.
Ms. Davidson.
Mr. Co-Chair, that's a great question. I think that there's two ways that the volunteers capture walk-in traffic, and they do that with the help of the ANI, particularly Lori during the week. If they're particularly busy, they count them on a clicker, and they also register them in the computer. And so it's kind of a check, you know, I cross-pollinate the numbers to make sure that they're accurate. I think candidly, you are right. It's a rough estimate because some visitors may come in the southeast garden level door and not go to the first floor. Some visitors may come in from Hirschler, let's say, and make their way to the Capitol. So it is an estimate. And I think it's probably safe to say there is probably more visitation than it's actually captured. But that's the best way that we've been able to do it. I know with the completion of the wayfinding and exhibit project, we'll have much more wayfinding and exhibits to tell visitors to check in on the first floor with a volunteer docent. And so hopefully we're capturing more people. Just anecdotally, since I'm in the garden level, I do interact with a lot of visitors who oftentimes look lost and encourage them to check in on the first floor and help kind of welcome them into the building. But I think that's just to say you can't always capture 100% of quote unquote true visitors. And then maybe kind of sometimes like you, Representative Nicholas, you have people who come in that really just don't want to talk. They're on a mission. They know where they're going, and they're maybe not categorized as a true visitor to the building.
Representative Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I too am very excited that the Capitol building's open on the weekends, and I think that's fabulous. I saw one of the concerns is that we're pulling highway patrolmen off of the state duties. And I was just curious, and I'm not even sure if it would work, but if we could contact the military department. I'm not sure what the highway patrolman does, if they have access to all the security systems and the cameras, or they're just here as a symbol. And I know that the military department, you know, can't not make arrests. And I know that's one of the concerns, but you know, if we could get 4 of those weekend warriors down to just kind of roam the halls, I don't know if that would be an option. And then it would cut back on some of the expenses. So just food for thought. I don't necessarily, or would you agree? Excuse me. Thank you.
Any comments, Director Bach?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Zonitzer, I don't think it's pulled off of duties because it's overtime for the highway patrolman. So my understanding, and I will verify this if I'm speaking out of turn, but that position on a Saturday is somebody who is working overtime. So we're really not pulling them off of anywhere. They're getting additional overtime, and it seemed to work really well for the highway patrol at that time.
Further questions, comments? Director Obrecht?
Madam Chairman, and maybe I could just put a bow on, or not a bow on this, but maybe just throw our recommendations out to you on where we go forward with this. We think on the appetite of our docents, they enjoy Saturdays on a limited basis. So from Memorial Day, either through Labor Day, or we think we may have the numbers to extend it through the end of September. There's a lot of people who travel in September, a lot of retirees. Great time to travel because families are back in school. And so we think that Memorial Day or some other time earlier in May through maybe the end of September. Plus what we'd like to do is extended hours during the summer too, keep the Capitol open till 6 during that time. And then also do Saturday and extended hours when we've got the Christmas tree up. So end of that last Saturday in November through the new year. And then we'd also like to explore maybe doing some special events later on too. Maybe like Rihanna Easter egg roll or trick or treating, which we already kind of do in an informal way.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that, what you'll see from the museum numbers is they really garner a lot of increased participation with what these are kind of activities that they have planned throughout the year. And I have gone to those you'll look at those July numbers. That July 15th was Dino Days at the museum, and it was a very great immersive experience with my 2 little boys. And so I think there's an opportunity to grow and pilot some capital events to bring in residents in different times of the year who might not be at the Capitol and really market that as experiencing the People's House and kind of the off seasons. I think like Matt said, some low hanging fruit would be kind of a trick or treating event, maybe a festival of trees in the Capitol Extension or hot cocoa before the Christmas parade, or even an Easter egg roll, kind of somewhat what they do at the National Capitol in DC. So kind of figuring out what's the appetite, what's the best time of year, what do people really want to do, what else is, where are there opportunities in the community to do that?
Madam Chairman.
Representative Stitt.
So Rihanna or Matt, what's the current schedule? So for this Saturday, for example, is the Capitol open or closed this Saturday?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Stith, it has been closed since Labor Day. So since Labor Day weekend was the last weekend, the Capitol was open on Saturday.
Madam Chairman, I guess I misunderstood. I thought we'd made an appropriation to keep it open on Saturdays for a year. I didn't realize it was going to be closed after Labor Day, but.
Did we do that, Mr. Richards?
Madam Chairman, that language was vetoed by the governor. The $350,000 remains. And just as an update, I know this is straying a bit from the question, but of the $350,000 appropriation, and the agency does have access for presumably May or June of next year until the end of the biennium. $17,219 was expended on this, what I would describe as a pilot program due to the language that was vetoed.
Madam Chairman, just
Representative
for Don, and was that veto accomplished by interlineating just a couple of words inside a sentence or a phrase inside a sentence?
I think that's rhetorical, Mr. Richards. Director Obrecht?
And Madam Chairman, and Representative Stith, and we've had some internal meetings. And I guess what we think right now is this is the next step in the progression of making this building more of a centerpiece in this county and in this state as a tourism destination. Is let's see for another year, expanding the hours during the summer, keeping the building open on Saturdays during the holiday season, and then come back to you next year to see if there's an appetite to expand it even more. And if we have the visitation numbers that keep going up as well. And I think this is also something we need to consider once we get the exhibit and wayfinding project stood up too. How much more there will be to see than at that point in time, and how much more we can do with the State Museum to help promote each facility and the Department of Tourism to help grow this as a tourism destination.
Director Bach?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. The one thing I'd like to add to that, and we would agree, when we start looking at winter, things dramatically change for us, for A&I. So when we take care of the museum as well on Saturday, that's the front door in a parking lot. Taking care of a snowfall Friday night for opening on Saturday for the Capitol is dramatically different and would require additional help. So that's one thing. If we do look through, as Director Obrecht talked about, expanding those hours, kind of making sure that we're maybe May 1st to September 30th, and work through that process for another round, I think we get a better idea of what we need. So for example, we have folks that are alternating on Saturday, which is not real tenable for the staff. We also don't need that higher level of an employee in that position on Saturday. The docents, I think they have kind of some concerns on the winter time as well. I'll let you talk about that if that's appropriate, but LSO has the docents, they're volunteers, A&I doesn't have any volunteer to work. So I think if we did the extended hours and we did the pilot program, we would still need a level 4, a lower level employee that could take on that burden on the Saturdays. So I just want to make sure that was out there. We did not spend a lot of the appropriation because we were able to make it work. And we don't think we need a ton of staff for Saturdays, Monday through Saturday. We decided when we originally asked, I think co-chair will remember that we asked for some trades folks, and we realized that even being open Saturday, there's not a big difference of things breaking or things like that in the Capitol. So we were pretty confident with that. We felt pretty good about that. But between the Highway Patrol and A&I, it's a little harder for us because we don't have the volunteers. But we would like to be able to figure out a way to make it work so that all we could do the hot cocoa on the parade days and things like that.
Wonderful. Any additional comments? Representative Walters? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Bach, from an HRD perspective, is working on Saturday automatic overtime, or could somebody be scheduled for their 40-hour week to be Tuesday through Saturday of 8-hour days, and that Saturday would just be standard work week? If you, like I said, from just a standard practice of HRD.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Walters, we would do a Tuesday through Saturday. That's what we would do, and it would not necessarily be overtime. Sometimes it depends on when our payroll cutoff is, but generally speaking, that's how we would set it up, to make sure that the person who's going to be working Tuesday through Saturday is a regular schedule. That's their regular schedule. There may be a couple hiccups depending on when the cutoff is, but it's generally speaking, it wouldn't be.
Follow up on a different
Yes.
topic, if I may, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, a question for Mr. Richards, if I may. The $350,000 will expire at the end of June, this summer, correct? So for this pilot project to continue next summer, it's really only funded until the end of June, and then we would need to carry on.
Madam Chairman, that is correct.
Follow up.
Absolutely, Representative. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you just make a note for us, Dawn, that we may want to carry this funding over or reappropriate it?
Think about it. Don't have to be over quite yet. Any additional questions? Senator
Chair.
Salazar.
Madam Chair, I am clearly oversensitive, but I need to say something. And I know that Representative Zwanitzer didn't mean anything by it, but the phrase weekend warrior left the rear exit after 9/11, given the high tempo deployment cycles that our folks go with in the National Guard and reserves. And so I wanted to pass that along.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Zwanitzer.
Madam Chairman, my apologies to the committee. It was a slip of the tongue.
All right, thank you. Senator Kinsky?
Following up on Representative Nicholas's concern about missing people who may have come, you might, if you haven't already, might visit with the tourism office about their geocaching or geo tracking or geo netting or something. Their project that might give you some assistance in people that hit a web page, see state capitol, and then actually show up. I just typed in Wyoming State Capitol, and your Google page has a website link that takes you to the Capitol Square project, which is not the best place to go. Then there's Wikipedia, and then there's Visit Cheyenne, Wyoming State Capitol building, and then something about A&I Visit the Capitol. But they'd be able to maybe help figure out where these people are coming from, who actually hits the building, whether they register or not.
No one says that we are not cool.
Madam
We
Chair,
said geolocate today.
as a
That's a big deal.
follow-up to that, Senator Kinsky, we are working with that on the exhibit and wayfinding project, and that's part of the project of some collateral materials, creating one central website for Capitol visitation, a virtual tour, lesson plan. So that is definitely something in the works, and there's lots of exciting work coming with that exhibit and wayfinding subcommittee, like Director Obrecht indicated, and we'd be happy to sit with you and bring any of you up to speed on that project. There's lots of exciting things coming in the near future.
Follow on it. If you're actually hosted somewhere on the travel and tourism page, though, you might be able to take advantage of all their tools. That was the only thought I had. People that are searching for things to do are more likely to hit that than anything you guys may do on your own, because they have lots of money now.
All right, thank you. Any further comments? Representative Henderson? But this is the
Thank
topic
you.
that brought everyone together. Representative Henderson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director Bach, the numbers in your memo, just want to clarify my understanding. It's 512,000 and that's close to 513, but then there's some more numbers associated with the trooper overtime. Are those numbers good for an annual cost for this program, or are those, please help me understand what those numbers mean.
Director Bach?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Henderson, those numbers, I believe you're talking on page 4 of 6, those take into consideration all the options. So when we're talking about essentially staying where we were, adding a couple hours on Saturday, keeping it open slightly longer, we're looking really at that BAS 04 position. Now, if we end up opening for the winter, that's when we get into the grounds and additional custodians and things like that. So this is kind of taking into it all. So if we were able to do it with a BAS 04, that number is a biennial number. So that 98,000, which, as we discussed, the total, we're within that total that we have for the 350.
Gotcha. Madam Chairman.
Yes.
Quick follow-up. So what caught my eye was the opportunity to avoid the seasonal layoffs. In the memo, it says this would help eliminate the seasonal layoffs.
Right.
Is that the case?
Director.
Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, if we had to do a seasonal, they would have to be laid off. And I anticipate that we would have to do a seasonal if that's what the JAC would like to see. So it would have to be a seasonal person, and it would be a little harder given this building. I'd rather see a permanent employee in here on Saturday that is working with the docents during the week, with Lori during the week. I would be a little bit reluctant to have a seasonal person in that position when there's really nobody else around.
Further comments? All right, let's hear from some public comment on this topic, and then we'll come back to the committee on next steps. So any public comment? Mr. Garrett? You guys can stay.
Oh, committee, my apologies again. Richard Garrett, Cheyenne. First, mention has been made of the wayfinding and exhibits subcommittee. And of course, Chairman Nicholas and Representative Sherwood have done great work on that subcommittee, as have so many others in this room and LSO staff members in particular, State Building Commission members. I know if you're not directly aware of their work, indirectly, I know you're grateful for it. And it will be a great tie-in to all that's being considered today. I think our beautiful capital, the more accessible it is to the more people, the better off our state will be and our state of government. I was in the garden level about a week ago and a person walked in. I was just doing some emails and in anticipation of a meeting outside the door or just inside the door. The person walked in and within 6 steps said, "Oh, what a beautiful building." And that is such a remarkable experience, so rewarding. And I wish it's something you could all have. And then finally, I'm looking forward to being a docent. And you should too, because then you won't have to hear from me ever again, except in that capacity. So thanks very much.
So noted.
As it is your will, it is my way.
Sir Docent Garrett, thank you for your comments. All right. Any further public comment? Seeing none. All right. Public comments closed. Committee, back to you. What do you want to do with this pilot project? Co-Chairman Nicholas, Representative Stiff.
Madam Chairman, my preference is for option 4, having it open year round on Saturdays. I think this is a beautiful building. We spent $300 million on this thing. That we do, I think it's not just for tourists, it's for people from the state of Wyoming to enjoy this building. And when hockey teams come and visit and play in Cheyenne, they're here on the weekends, they're not here during the day. Maybe their only time to see the Capitol. So I think given that there was, the cost estimates for doing the Saturday program appear to have been, they were able to do the summer pilot program with much less expense than expected. So I think we, go for the gusto here and make it open to the public as much as we can and talk to the governor about it.
Is there a second to that concept? Co-Chairman Nicholas, any comments? All right, seconded for discussion. Further discussion? Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah. I too, I actually spent a bit of time here and one of my, I really enjoy sitting down on the floor and just greet tourists as they come in and actually spend quite a bit of time. And I've been known even to sit in this room and see out the window and see tourists come by when we're hearing presentations that maybe are a little less scintillating, but I get up and pretend to go get a cup of coffee and take people on a tour of the building. Probably should admit that, but I do. And everyone says the same thing. For the first thing they say is how beautiful it is. Second thing they say is they can't believe that there's the absence of a strong security presence that they actually enjoy, that they think that that's just about the coolest thing in the world. It makes me, I guess, as a question, I too would like to see it open year round. I'd like to see us get there, but I'm willing to defer to the folks that are having to do this handle this to get, to take heed of their input. And I understand about the cost of on a snowy day of what it would cost to, take care of the grounds and everything else to keep it open. So I'm willing to keep an open mind about it, but I agree. I think it should be open, but I'd just like to, if we come up with a plan, also maybe even to talk about involving civic groups, NGOs, other folks, whether, when you talk about Easter egg rolls and you talk about haunted house type things or, trick-or-treating things, that maybe that could get assimilated into some things that they're doing, whether it be, involving them and trying to get them involved. That maybe even that could get them thinking along lines of volunteering to help more on the grounds and whether it be on the weekends or whatever. So that'd be my comment on all
Madam Chair.
Legislature Easter egg roll. I can see it now. Director Nicholas.
Well, I was just thinking that we could do Halloween treats and we could actually use the ceremonial offices and have each one have competition on who has the most kids and the best candy. It'd be kind of fun. And it would be good twice the use those ceremonial offices get all year right there.
I judge the candy.
I do have a couple, different issues with it. Number one, if the idea that we hire a full-time custodian to be open on weekend for one day. And then I see that, well, they'll be doing other things. But this actually brings me back to some other questions I wanted to ask you. Number one, on the custodial care. Do we have enough custodians as it is now, even without opening on Saturdays? And how are they doing? And that's, let me just kind of walk through all these. The other big one is the groundskeeper folks and working on the flowers and the flower beds and that type of thing. I would really like to resurrect the old mom's UW someplace. Remember when it was out on the east or on the other side? It was on the other side of the Buffalo.
Did you just say you want moms?
I think their moms are no, there were
I just
the yellow orange.
need to stop.
They were just.
I think they were chrysanthemums.
They were the
Chrysanthemums.
yellow flowers that were right in front of it. And it was just, it was just neat. And so we've talked about this. And so if we actually have a full-time groundskeeper that take on that role as part, and then also then switch over to snow removal. So I can see a full-time person for that. How are we with you having sufficient staffing now for groundskeeping? So those two questions first.
Madam Chairwoman, Co-Chair Nicholas, because of the compensation, I do believe we are not fully staffed now, but we were for 2 days in August or September, I believe, in the custodial area. That hadn't been that way for 3 years, maybe more. So we are coming back from our vacancies. With the Capitol being open, and I understand it's a hard argument to make and to understand on why you're only 1 day. Why do you have to have staff? The problem is the staff, just like the Highway Patrol, has to ask for volunteers to work on that Saturday. The lead custodian, which is a 5, and then a 1 custodian for this Saturday. So you have to ask for volunteers. There's no backup. And that's part of the issue. If we could have somebody who is dedicated to working on that Saturday. With regards to the grounds folks and the snow removal, it's difficult to determine how that's going to look depending on the snow year. We deal with the Saturdays with the museum. Like I said, it's very limited on what we have to do there. This building is much different. And access to the building from St. Mary's parking lot, from the parking structure as well. So having the buildings and grounds horticulturalist that we've talked about, that could be double duty and very well is probably a very good idea. I don't know how much has been talked about that, but if we had somebody on staff that was the gardener, our buildings and grounds folks are able to, in buildings and grounds, when I say that, that's custodial and snow removal, cutting the grass, all of that. They're able to cross if they need to. And so a person who is a gardener who will do snow removal in the winter is essentially what we have now. That's not something that would be new. So the gardener would be new, but they can transfer into the snow removal. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Can they grow mums?
They can. If it's a horticulturalist, they would grow mums.
Sounds like it's solved. Further discussion? Representative Sherwood?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Does the city of Cheyenne have a snow removal ordinance that whether we are open or not, the snow would still need to be cleared for safety reasons?
We are the state. Just some sovereignty here, Representative Sherwood. Don't forget your parking tickets.
Madam Chairwoman, I cannot quote what that would be. I will tell you with the way that we run it, if there's a big snow on Saturday, our guys will have to be here to make sure that it's open for Monday. If it's a little bit of snow, they might come in Sunday to get that ready for Monday. But I can get back to you on that. I would assume the answer would be no. The sidewalks are a different issue, so I don't want to speak out of turn, and I can get back to you on that.
Madam Chair.
Senator Kinsky?
You know, I'd like to know more about it being open year round. The money is a concern, but more concern to me is whatever the docent's concern was. I mean, if I'm a docent and I'm in here and it's just dead for 8 hours, I'm probably not going to be a docent for very long, but so I'd like to know a little bit more about what their concerns are about opening on Saturdays year round. You know, part of the answer, I think, is we have to get to the mentality government only runs 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. You know, I hate to keep talking about being mayor in Sheridan, but we ran the landfill 7 days a week. Said, well, we're only scheduled for Monday through Friday. Well, then start scheduling people for Wednesday through Sunday. They'll quit. They didn't quit. If they were unhappy, we just hired other people. I mean, it can be done. It's not insurmountable. And for all you know, there may be retirees that would do some of this work, the groundskeeper and the custodial stuff on weekends, or people that have a day job during the week. The other part of it is I'm a little concerned about the cost allocation. What I thought I heard you say is if there's, I'm following Representative Sherwood, if there's a big storm and we have to clear it out for Saturday morning, somehow that gets charged to this. I think you got to clear the snow out no matter what, whether it's a sidewalk, it's the state capital of the state of Wyoming. If there's a big storm, clear the snow. I don't think that gets charged to the visitor program. Security, we spent $300 million on the building. There probably ought to be security here over the weekend of some kind, if not a highway patrolman. Somebody ought to be here whether the building's open or not, but there ought to be somebody here. So a lot of those, I'm a little concerned about the cost allocation. I hate to put my thumb too heavy on the scale on the cost, because I think a lot of those costs are just costs we should have and we should bear. And I hate to see this program overloaded with cost to make it look like it's somehow it's too expensive or unsustainable when there's probably things we ought to be doing anyway. And personally, I like those big flower beds too. I think it says something nice about the state and about the facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Salazar.
Madam Chair, I'd like to see this open year round on Saturdays.
So, Madam Co-Chair, I am curious because I believe, isn't Division O, they have folks here who are down in the basement or in their command center. So they're on the grounds, just not out in the public every day.
Madam Chairwoman, okay. There are contracts that YDOT has that are here in the building, in the basement.
Yeah.
Director Obrecht.
So SecOps will be here all the time. They're here, but usually they're monitoring in the SOC and they're not patrol. So when we have the building open, the standard operating procedure has always been to have one SecOps person and then one highway patrol on duty. That way the SecOps doesn't need to rely on Cheyenne PD to come if an arrest needs to be made immediately. So that's the situation. But I don't think if we're not open, there's always a highway patrolman here. In fact, I don't think there is now.
And as a follow-up to that, Madam Chair, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Bach, that the current SecOps contract was downgraded, for lack of a better term. So the officer that's here on the weekend doesn't carry a firearm or a weapon. And so I'll just put a plug in here for the volunteers did feel, as elderly people, safer with the highway patrol and the K9 here on the weekend doing sweeps, because naturally a lot of visitors on the weekend were bringing backpacks and, strollers or whatever it was. And so they felt like with the highway patrol sweeping the building throughout the day gave them a sense of comfort when the rest of the building was empty, minus government workers.
All right, thank you. committee to refocus us, because we have had a good time with this topic. Let's focus on, it sounds like there is consensus to keep the Capitol open year round. Is there anyone that takes a contrary position? Appears not. So it looks like the second question is costs and what that looks like. So how about if we have Director Bach? Well, I heard Senator Guru say he had hesitation about the director's concerns about, or suggestion about doing another year of a pilot or open just primarily for the summer. And so some thoughts, I think, to consider in light of that recommendation or that suggestion, to do implementation of a full staffing year round later, with implementation of that later down the road. Or thoughts, more further thoughts about that? Do we want a full bill draft that includes mums?
Madam Chair, I'd like to get a little bit more information. I'd like to know what the docent's hesitation or concern is. Do we know?
The docent's concerns, Senator Kinski? Ms. Davidson?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I guess I can probably handle that quickly. Senator, I think it's twofold. One, they just don't want to commit to it year round. They want their Saturdays year round. So if we did do Saturdays year round, we would try to find docents on a volunteer basis who are willing to do it on a Saturday. If we couldn't, we would hire somebody part-time. We did that during COVID. Somebody to come in and do it and get paid to be a docent Saturday. That wouldn't be a huge issue for LSO. And I do think that docents also wonder about whether there's the need right now for Saturday visitation year round, whether there's the visitor numbers to drive that. But I do think that there are steps that could be taken to increase our visitor numbers during the winter. There's no doubt about that at all. So as we move forward, I think we will have more visitor numbers during the winter than we currently have. Something else I did.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up. I think just as a policy body, I think it's worth asking yourselves is how much juice is worth the squeeze, right? Is it, and I don't think we've really distilled it down of how much does it cost to keep the building open for one day? Does that justify 25 people? What's the magic number that makes everyone feel like X amount of visitors in the building warrants the cost? And I can just tell you anecdotally, right down to Director Obrecht's point, it kind of slows down right now, October, November, it picks up around the winter. The building is hustle and bustle during the legislative session. And then the traffic picks up, as you would guess, in May, but the spring is a heavy field trip season during the week. I think that inherently, to Director Obrecht's point, there will be a lot to do once the exhibit and wayfinding work is done. So it really will become an immersive experience for visitors to come in and experience and spend lots of time here. Right now, you do rely pretty heavily on the volunteer docent and on a tour video to kind of provide that level of facilitation and direction, because there's just right now not a lot to see other than the beautiful building, which it's beautiful. But other than that, we're in the process of getting freestanding panels affixed to the wall, digital experiences. So more is coming. So that's just something for you guys to consider as you think about
the timing of that.
So good question. And I'd be happy to let Representative Nicholas or Representative Shorewood answer this question.
Keep going.
Well,
It's in the works. You'll see some static exhibits next late spring, hopefully early summertime, and digital exhibits late summer, early fall. Capping off the showpiece, would say of the experience is where the shelled visitor center is in the Capitol Extension. That's been renamed to the Civics Lab. That's the interactive room targeting 5th graders through 12th grade years teaching about government. That'll be done in early 2025. So it's coming next year. It's just, we've been trying to push for those tourism dates and we're not sure if we can get there.
Okay, thank
Follow up.
you. Senator Kinski?
So, and this is perhaps to Representative Nicholas as much as to you. My concern is I'd prefer that we not open on Saturdays till we know more about being able to accurately track the number of visitors. and that you've got the wayfinding and all those things in place. My concern is that we do it too soon. And then the data looks like there's hardly anybody here on Saturday. We'll shut it down. And we may not have the right data. Because the other part of it is, it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, you can run on Saturdays, but it's going to have to be a 2-3 years of promotion and gradually being able to build. And so I think having the right data is going to be important, and having everything in place is going to be important. I'd make sure that we're in a true state of readiness before we go to Saturday year round would just be my inclination.
I sense we are circling the drain. You know how I am right here. There does now seem to be a different kind of shift based on, I think, 3 senators' comments about waiting to implement the full year round until everyone who's responsible for implementing the full year round feels more confident about that and is hopeful and believes that that's prudent. So Co-Chairman Nicholas?
Yeah, and so, yeah, to follow up on your comments, Madam Co-Chair, what I would suggest is that I'll get together with Trish and put together a proposal that will go into the budget that will implement a plan that will essentially begin in the spring in terms of when we open and making sure there's adequate funding to go at least through the summer and a kind of a build out as we're moving forward with wayfinding and kind of take it one step at a time. And so that would be my suggestion.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Co-Chairman Nicholas. I think that's prudent. And so we'll hear from Director Bach in December as part of kind of a budget presentation, that this would be included as part of that budget is understanding the funding associated with making sure the capital can stay open in the coming years. So with that, committee, I think we'll close this topic out. We will take a 10-minute break to wake up, move around a little bit. So we will come back at 3:34. All right, committee, we are back after our break. We are ready for our last agenda item of the day. Item 25, Veterans Home of Wyoming update. This, of course, agenda item is in response to previous questions that this committee presented to Director Johansson of the Department of Health. And so the purpose of this is just to give us an update to those questions that were previously asked. Director Johansson, welcome. It's good to see you. If you would introduce yourself and who you have with you, we're happy to hear the update.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Stefan Johansson with the Wyoming Department of Health, joined by Franz Fuchs, our chief. How's that? Yeah. Stefan Johansson with the Wyoming Department of Health, joined by Franz Fuchs, our chief policy and data analyst. And to my left, Director Jerry Vincent from the State Construction Department. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, Madam Chairman. We provided the committee with a memo answering your questions about the Veterans Home domiciliary project. I want to start by saying and clarifying that we have two levels of care now at the Buffalo campus of the Veterans Home. We have the what is formerly the Soldier and Sailors Home, which is what we refer to as the domiciliary, basically an assisted living facility that's been there for years and years. And we also have the skilled nursing facility, which was recently built. We took occupancy of it this past summer and are getting ready to move residents in to that new nursing home in the first part, hopefully in the first part of November. This project that you have in front of you is strictly for the domiciliary, a full remodel and redesign of the domiciliary or assisted living facility on that campus. Very briefly, I know it's been a couple of days for you all, but very briefly by way of background, in 2013, the Department of Health had a complete facility condition assessment conducted for all 5 of our state facilities. In that report that came back to us and to the legislature, the recommendation was that we had significant capital needs at all of the facilities, but in priority rank, the state hospital first, the Life Resource Center in Landers second, and the Veterans Home domiciliary third. The legislature, as you all know, formed a task force and ultimately rebuilt the Wyoming State Hospital, rebuilt the Wyoming Life Resource Center. But at the time that those decisions were being made, essentially punted the decision on the Veterans Home to do at another date. In between these times, the legislature also made the decision that we needed to construct a nursing home because we were the only state in the union that did not have a veterans skilled nursing facility. So that recommendation to redo the domiciliary also got delayed again while we worked to build the new nursing home at the Buffalo campus, which is complete. So this is years in the making. I will say, as the director for the health department, and many of you know this who have been on that campus or been to that facility, the facility at some point absolutely needs to be redone. It's an amalgam of buildings going back, to the 40s. You can actually kind of see the different layouts. We're in the 1940s building, we're in the 50s, we're in the 60s, and ultimately into, I think the last addition was in 1983. We make it work. The staff do a good job. But for those of you who served on the facilities task force, I think the conclusion was pretty unanimous that at some point the facility needed a facelift. And so that's what you have in front of you. But it gets a little bit intricate with the interaction with the Veterans Administration, the VA. The way these projects work is that states can make application to the VA for construction projects on these facilities, just like we did with the nursing home. And if approved, there's a 65% match, or the VA funds 65% of the construction cost and the state funds 35%. We were approved in priority group 1 for the nursing home, mostly because Wyoming, again, was highly prioritized by the VA as the only state that did not have a veterans skilled nursing facility. This domiciliary project is a little bit different, and we're not quite that high on the priority list. We are currently number 69 out of 73 projects. So we are relatively low, but we are in priority group 1. Priority group 2 is generally for projects that are proposed to the VA where state funding has not been secured. And those are rarely, if ever, funded in the federal appropriation process.
No.
if there's 73 projects, we're 69. How many projects do they do a year? So what can we, and do new projects slide in above us based upon need on new applications each year?
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, I'll have Mr. Fuchs answer that. He's deep in the weeds of the Kafkaesque federal bureaucracy with the VA. But it is subject to the federal appropriation process of every year what they make available for projects. And that has changed over the years. It used to be quite generous. Now with the appropriations process in DC, not so much in recent years, but I'll let Franz answer that of how that prioritization works.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. I'm Franz Fuchs, Chief Policy Analyst, Department of Health. Madam Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, figure one, I think gets to your point. So on this memo that we sent over, figure one shows both nominal on the top and inflation adjusted project requests, appropriations, and actual funded dollars. And so I think the middle graph is kind of helpful. You kind of see the total requests are roughly hovering around $800 to $700 million a year in total project requests. And the actual funded projects are usually quite low. With some exceptions. So you can see 2018, 2021, and 2022, they made some efforts to appropriate a lot of money to clear out the backlog. And so when you look at the figure two on the bottom there, the percentage of total project dollars funded in those years was quite high. I don't anticipate those salad days to continue just based on the current fiscal climate in DC. So we would anticipate things kind of reverting back to the 20% baseline. So approximately 20% of total project dollars being approved any given year. However, we would move up gradually, although there would be projects slotted above us. We did try to make an estimate based on the priority grouping that we're currently in, which is 1.4.f, again, referring to the Byzantine VA categorization process. Some of them do get funded any given year. And so based on analysis of past trends back to 2013, we estimated it would take about between 4 to 10 years for the funding to be approved. However, the real caveat there is if you look at every other project in the 1.4.f category, they are all, or most of them, under $5 million. Ours is 46. So we are an order of magnitude higher than any other project in that categorization since 2013. So we've written to the VA about this concern, and we don't believe we've been fairly and appropriately categorized. We're waiting to hear if they're going to slot us into a higher priority grouping based on our arguments. That's not guaranteed. The prioritization is at their discretion. But because we are such an outlier on our project dollars, that 4 to 10 range really applies to, maybe smaller projects that maybe they could fit in, based on allowable funding as the funding allows. So that's our best guess, but it comes with a significant caveat.
So follow up, Hans, how long have we been on the list and how long have we been in tier one?
Madam Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, we've been on the list for 1 year. This is the fiscal year 23 is when we got on the list. They're developing the fiscal year 24 list now.
So why didn't we get on the list in 2013? So, well, because it has to be appropriated. So it's set aside, but it's just sitting there.
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, so in the 2022 session is when the legislature appropriated the state match for this project.
Okay.
That's what essentially guarantees us to be in priority grouping 1.
I see.
Those projects without the secure state funding typically go to priority 2.
So do we know the likelihood of, if we fund the full thing, say 75 million, build it, and someone over there says, why should we pay them? They just built the whole darn thing.
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, wager a guess here. I think it's likely it would be funded at some point if the application remains in the current year's, priority 1 projects. It's just the timing of it that is so uncertain. And Mr. Fuchs knows, as a member of my staff, 2 things. 1, I don't like these wide ranges that he gives me, 4 to 10 years or between 10 and $100 million on some things. It's not entirely helpful. And 2, the Shakespearean language like salad days. We've talked about eliminating that from testimony, but that notwithstanding, I was discussing with Senator Kinski earlier. It's a little bit of a tough, proposal for me to come in here and make with that uncertainty. But I think there's two things I would add. One, we all know the need is there. But two, I think a project of this scale and magnitude, it's a tough policy decision of, do we leave the application in as it is right now and wait for either the VA to change their prioritization for us, or within a year or two, maybe we're closer to being funded. The downside of that is construction having to be rebid, cost escalators and inflation going up. And most importantly, with the VA application that we have, and with all VA applications of these types, they are not inflation proofed on the federal level. So the federal funds that we're applying for are essentially static. So if we left the application in as it is and waited for the federal funds to come in, essentially the downside fiscally there is that the state would be on the hook for any inflation escalators down the line. So that 35% match from the state side would kind of artificially inflate by the inflation adjusters we would have.
So let me just, can I follow up on? So Stefan, does it make sense that we withdraw our application, submit a new one, because we go from 69 maybe down to 73, and inflation proof the number, so that the number, and we'll just say, because literally between the time we submitted last year and now, building costs have probably gone up 20 or 30%. And so it goes from a $75 million building to a $95 million building.
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, that's right. I have some anxiety about withdrawing the project and starting from scratch, because it is dependent on where we would be in the next prioritization schedule, if that makes sense, as opposed to either, I see two routes here. Leave the application in knowing there could be a fiscal impact on the state side by whatever time occurs between now and the application of the VA being approved. And there's some uncertainty there. Or two, as the State Building Commission passed on to this body through its recommendation, front load the cost. We would break ground, looking to Director Vincent, this spring. That all that work, level 1, 2, and 3 has been done. Contractor, I think that would have to be rebid based on the time that's passed since last year and now, but a good chance that we'd be in the ballpark and be able to break ground in the spring. But with the uncertainty of the state appropriators not knowing, is it 2 years or 10 years before we see that reimbursement from the federal government on the 65% match? And being totally open and honest here, I know there's other capital construction needs around the state. We are certainly one of them at the Veterans Home. But that's the quagmire from my perspective, is, do you front load now and build and get potentially reimbursed later? Or do we set the application, keep it in, and wait for the federal funds to come in to start, knowing that rebidding would need to occur and inflation escalators would most certainly be part of that equation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So if I'm understanding that correctly, we've kind of got this fixed price that the feds, if we leave the application, we've kind of got this fixed price that the feds will pay as we move up. And we've funded our portion based on current prices. So, and this might be to Director Vincent, if we were planning on this 88 is what I think this $88 million project as a whole, if we inflation proof what we've already appropriated, or what we have left of what we've appropriated, to account for the inflation on our portion and an estimated inflation on what the federal side is going to increase. Any feel on what that would look like dollar-wise? And Madam Chairman, just to clarify, anticipating that we would just inflation proof what we have until they did approve it, right? Taking in that if it gets over maybe 4 years, you're going to have have the design team redesign the design and that sort of stuff.
And Madam Chair, that's actually what I was going to say, Representative Larson. So in the packet, if you take a look at it, there's some detail in there. You're talking about on the concept you're talking about is pretty straightforward, but there's some moving parts inside that. What are we increasing the inflation to? One of the things that we have right now that we're just starting to enjoy since pre-COVID is a stabilized market compared to wherever the market might be in the future. So to take today's, we actually have a contractor who's given us a guaranteed maximum price. So when we have to take a look at today's cost and the drawings are complete and they're per today's code, what might change that makes them out of code that we are trying to inflate against? So there's an unknown, uncertain variable in there in terms of how much would the redesign cost be? What are they redesigning? What's the market that's going to roll out in terms of its cost on bid day in order to put an accurate inflate number together? And like the director was saying earlier, we do the same thing. We just don't want to give you a big old number. Let's just put 100 million on there just to cover it. So we trying to get to that, what that inflate number looks like, Representative Larson. There's three variables underneath that they have to come together in order to inflate it.
Director Johansson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Larson, on page 6 of the memo, just to give you the raw numbers, our current project cost per the bids that were received, and that's really how the federal funds in the application were determined and that are locked in, so to speak. The current project cost is $77 million total, all funding sources. We project that if the VA funding were received in 4 years, the total project cost would be approximately 83 million. If the funds are not received until 10 years out, the total project cost could inflate to 100 million. So I don't know if that helps in the scale. There's certainly some uncertainty there, as Jerry mentioned, but I think it's a good rough estimate.
Madam Chairman, thank you. So I want to come back to where you're at currently, because as you went into this process, you had to do so with the assumption that you'd be approved and then be ready to go. So you've engaged with a contractor who's going to do the construction management, CMAR, right? Help us understand, Director Vinson, just again, what that means and why, because we've got this 77 million. Help us understand that price range. Have they would be under contract to keep it at that level. Is that correct? Madam Chair, Representative Larson, correct. But we can go back and come forward again. So there is 100% design. We have competitively done a construction management at risk CMAR. We do have a general contractor. He turned in a guaranteed maximum price in June, and his number was good for 60 days. So that has passed. The next time that they would take a look at it is in January. They would take a look and see what is that. That's the next point on what the bid number was at the time. We've talked about the 69 number, and then what that would inflate to just from June until this period now. And then that would be your new base that you're starting from, in which you would inflate down the road off of, if that helps make sense. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yeah.
So what you've suggested is that this would,
If it's approved, your preference is that we go ahead and build it and break ground in the spring. So that means it has to be a budgetary item that is approved immediately, on signature. And that would, so we're talking 1st of March at the earliest, probably, if not. And so you're gonna have to go out to bid again and go through those processes and break ground. If you want to break ground by May or June, that's a pretty tight schedule to actually go through the bidding process and get everything launched. I mean, I don't see it happening, frankly, but that's, tell me what your perception of that is.
Director Johansson.
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, this body has put me through a lot, and I have a lot of PTSD with all the CapCon from the last 7 or 8 years. So
I was about to say, you guys look the same as you did five years ago. We are all aging. You guys aren't. It's not fair.
My point is, I don't know what I would recommend. Again, I have to go back to, what the legislature and the facilities task force recommended back, going back to 2014 and 2015 was that there's clearly a need. I want to do right by the facility and the residents there, that it needs to at some point be reconstructed. I will also mention to the committee that once groundbreaking happens per the current design and schedule, this is not a facility like the state hospital where we built a new building and then moved into it. This would be a 4-year project that because we have to move patients or residents around while we do sections of the current campus, the remodel at one time. So it's a lengthy project because we just don't have a place like we did on the campus of Lander or Evanston where our patients or residents are residing while we build a campus, on the other side of the acreage that we have. I mention that because it is logistically, intense to get it done, but we're ready to do it. If forced to make a recommendation to this body, I think given the uncertainty we have at the federal level and the uncertainty on timing, I do think per the State Building Commission's recommendation, with all of the downsides that I mentioned, it does not make sense to withdraw the application and start over. But I understand your point about the timing that it would take in the short term if the state front loaded the funding and said, go ahead and get started. Could we hit that? I think so. But again, your points are well taken because we don't have the same locked in bid now that we did last June. So you, Co-Chairman Nicholas, you can clearly sense my tap dancing here. I don't intend to, but I do think the most prudent option, if the legislature deems it wise, would be to move forward with the project now. The caveat being, I know it's a significant appropriation given the capital construction needs that have been presented and will be presented to you in this year's budget.
Madam Chairman.
Representative Stith.
Madam Chairman, Director Johansson. So in 2022, we appropriated $24.85 million out of SIPA and then said, we're going to look for $46 million from the federal government. Just so I understand, now you're saying what you'd like us to do is spend $46 million additional out of general funds and hope the federal government pays it back to us someday. Is that the gist of it?
Madam Chairman, Representative Stith, in a nutshell, yes.
Representative Larson.
So what I keep mulling around in my mind is, as we in committee, as we mull the capital construction needs, where and how do we make the dollars go the furthest, and where do we save money? And I think that's, so if we say, if we only had to inflation proof our portion and the feds would adjust theirs when we meet it, I think that would be a reasonable approach to go. My question now is, because we could then take that 46 and do other things with it and save on escalated construction costs down the road. With that not being in there, if we take that 46, we don't front load it, we spend the other 46 million. Again, and this is kind of the second time of asking, I just am trying to understand what will this cost us in excess of what if we wait? How much are we, is it 2 million, 3 million? You've got this estimate down here. So is it 20 million that
Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Larson, even though the market is stabilizing, I think you're looking at about a 10% per year overall.
10% per year? Okay.
Senator Kinsky.
So I don't have the benefit of the 2013 assessment in front of me, but let me ask, State Hospital 1, Life Resource Center 2, and the Vets Home 3, was that ranking as number 3? Was it because, well, we'll rank that 3 because we can get federal money, or is that just based on objectively what the need is?
Madam Chairman, Senator Kinsky, it was just facility condition assessments. So
Okay.
the actual buildings
And-
in the disrepair that we saw on those campuses.
Okay, and did we withhold or hold back on building the state hospital or the Life Resource Center waiting for federal funding grant commitments, or did we just move ahead with those? Were those contingent on federal funding? Okay,
No.
follow on, please.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the appeal? You said that you're appealing that the ranking of the project. You said that they more highly rated small projects and that you're appealing that. What are you appealing to be on a different list? Are you appealing? Tell me what you're appealing.
Madam Chairman, Senator Kinski appealing to be higher on the current list. Let Mr. Fuchs elaborate on that, but the appeal has been sent to the VA. I'm not sure if we've heard back or even acknowledgement of that appeal, but it would be to move up on the current priority list.
Madam Chairman, Senator Kinski, there is no formal appeal process. We had a meeting with the staff at the VA and they asked us to send a letter. That's the extent of our appeal. They'll consider the letter. We have, I think, some very good arguments for why we should be moved up in the priority list, but ultimately it is their discretion. I know our congressional delegation is aware of this too, so they may be able to apply some pressure in that regard, but ultimately it is the VA's discretion in that priority.
Okay, and follow on. I'd like to get a copy of that. See a copy of that letter distributed to the committee materials after the meeting. And then one more follow on. Go back to Representative Nicholas's concept of pulling and refiling, and you said you're afraid that it would lower our priority. There's a list, whatever it is, 1A4 or something. Is that static or is that constantly moving? In other words, here's the list that they put together in 2022, and that's just, and all other lists come in behind it, or is this list constantly being reshuffled?
Madam Chairman, Senator Kinski, my understanding, Franz, feel free to correct me, is that it's prioritized every year by the applications that are received. So you can kind of think of it as cohorts every year of how those get put on the priority list based on the VA's criteria. Again, my concern that I was articulating is if we were told pull the application back, we'll reapply at a future date. Not only do we start over in the process, but it's dependent on what projects nationally come into the VA that year. So I couldn't tell you where exactly we would land on the priority list. I think we'd be somewhere similar in terms of the criteria because the project wouldn't have changed, but it depends on what other states or other veterans homes submit in their projects of where we would ultimately rank on that year's priority list. But bottom line is every year there is a priority list and it's subject to the appropriations that the VA receives and therefore what they do in terms of current year projects and backlogged projects. So that's really not trying to dodge the question here. It's just there's so much uncertainty with where we are and how those rankings get adjudicated.
Follow on if I
Sure.
could. You said it's your understanding. I'd like to be certain on it because it's pretty important. I mean, it's a good concept. If it's hard for me to believe that here's 71 projects from 2022 and they just march along statically, I would think they'd be constantly reshuffling the deck.
Mr. Fuchs.
Madam Chairman, Senator Kinski, so they sort of march along within priority groups. So if we're looking at our 1,4F priority only, then those would advance chronologically as they are funded, right? So if certain ones are funded in that priority group, then everyone would move up because within the priorities, they are stacked chronologically. However, our 1,4F is number 5 out of, there's 4 higher priorities. And so as projects get added to those other groupings, even if they're at the bottom of, say, the 1,4D group, we're effectively bumped down as those projects get added. So it's kind of both. It's dynamic in the sense that new projects get added to those higher priority groupings, but within the priority groups, they advance chronologically. Did that answer your question?
Well, I'm not sure, but that's a risk we take in any event, right? I mean, we're on this list now and they receive 4 more applications that rank higher. We bump down to 73.
Madam Chairman, Senator Kinski, that's only if those are higher priority than ours, ranked along those criteria. If they're lower priority, if they were another 1,4F or a 1.7, then they'd be below us.
I guess I'm failing to get are you following this?
Because I'm reading your last bullet point, it says that the higher priority, so nursing homes, and as long as a couple more nursing homes show up and they only have a certain, roughly so many millions per year that they give out, we could never, it could happen that it won't ever get for 10 years or 20 years. I mean,
That's right.
literally.
I think, from my perspective, committee, it would be helpful if we asked questions that can be answered rather than speculation on economic indicators coming in years to come on inflationary pressures or other market conditions and predicting the federal government. I mean, those two things cannot be known. Representative Larson and then Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just if you'll indulge me going to Senator Kinski's questions on the history of prioritization of the State Hospital Life Resource Center in this domiciliary coming out of the 2013 HDR study. We was then required to go and evaluate all of the state facilities. Those 3 facilities surfaced as needing to be replaced. At the time we approached the legislature, and I want to say this is in 2014, we recommended all 3. That was a year when we were pretty short, significantly short of funding, and we created the tranches. And the decision of the legislature then was to move forward with the State Hospital #1 Life Resource Center 2 because of the conditions of the building, particularly in Evanston, the seismic needs there, that they would move forward. I think it took us 3 years to get enough money through the tranche process that we moved into step 3. But at the time we decided to move with those 2 in that legislative session, it was that we didn't say that the domiciliary didn't need to be done. It just, we couldn't afford it at that time. And it's always kind of been hanging out there until this, but it didn't have anything to do with the government funding, the federal funding or anything else. It was just a priority.
Questions that they can actually answer with facts. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Isn't a question, it's more of a clarification for the committee. We are in the 2022 list of projects. We are in the subcategory 14F. The only way this project can get moved down from 69 to anywhere lower, 68 anywhere lower, is if in a 2022 project from 14 A, B, C, or D gets moved out of that category into the F category, because the A, B, C, and D categories trump the F category.
Bingo.
That's the only way we get bumped. Now that a 2023 project, a 2024 project will always be lower than our 2022 project. So hopefully that clarifies that a little bit. And really it's wonky, but that's the way it works. So that's the only way we can get bumped is if a higher classification, an A, B, C, D, et cetera, project comes out of that category and moves down. The reason the skilled nursing facility did so well a few years ago is it was a 14A or B, or, it was a higher category of that year's ranking and mark due to the fact that was already alluded to that Wyoming did not have a skilled nursing facility. So that's how it moves up and down. And then as described, it'll just continue to move forward until funded by the feds at some point, hopefully.
I have one more question. So how many of the residents are or were residents outside of Wyoming? And I have a recollection that there are restrictions that we can't limit folks from coming in from out of state. Isn't that correct?
Director.
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, that is correct. I'd have to get back to the committee on the current breakdown of where they came from. It's a mixed bag. We see admissions where folks were living out of state, but they have family in the area or family in Casper. That happens quite often, but have to get back on the current breakdown.
And then to follow up on that, what's the average turnover rate? I mean, how long does a resident last?
Madam Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, if you'll let me, I'll have to get back with you on that on our current length of stay. That's not necessarily meaning folks that come to the facility and die in the facility. We have folks discharged for various reasons, so that impacts,
Move on to nursing home care or whatever greater needs.
or we kick them out.
Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Does the project amount that you foresee now, notwithstanding, the inflation draft, does it include just the structures where the bedding and the main patient areas are? Does that include everything on the property?
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Henderson, so the project is fully encompassing of the current domiciliary. Now it varies. Obviously, the priority are the resident areas, the recreational areas, et cetera. But you have outbuildings and things of that nature, landscaping that would also be part of the project and the design.
Madam Chairman,
Yes, follow up.
would you agree that the current conditions up there are pretty grim?
Don't admit to that, Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Henderson, grim is not the word I would use. I think in need of remodel. We have buildings, like I said, going back to even before the 40s. We have resident areas, from the 40s and into the 50s. And there's certain issues with the ADA. There's narrow corridors, there's steeper ramps, things of that nature that we certainly work with Director Vincent and his fine staff on major maintenance and making sure, like we do at our other facilities, that it's as serviceable as possible. But I will say I'm at the Veterans Home often, and it is not impacting the quality of life for the residents per se. But the remodel and the redesign would greatly improve the quality of life of the residents there and our ability to deliver care 100%.
Further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you for being here today. Any additional questions for the director unrelated to this topic that you want to ask about? All right, no, you're free to go. Any public comment? Seeing none. Public comment is closed. Committee, back to you on this topic. Any suggestions? Directions? Requests? Senator Kinski, anything? Co-Chairman Nicholas? Anyone want to take bets on whether it be 4 or 10 years? All right. All right, with that, committee, we are done with our agenda items for the day. We will do committee updates and directives with Mr. Richards, and then we'll be prepared to drive home. Mr. Richards, please.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, over the past 2 days, you have approved 5 bill drafts for the 2024 session. There are an additional 6 bill drafts that will be coming back to you in December and/or January. And in the January timeframe, recall that there will be presumably 4 additional drafts from the committee, those being the local government funding, ARPA funding, capital construction, and the budget bill. That would bring a total known today of 15 bills out of the Joint Appropriations Committee. The December bills include major maintenance, ETS, the UI Training Trust, UI draft distribution of payments, the increased contribution, 0.5% for 2 years for the Public Employee Retirement Plan, and finally a move to ADC, or actuarially determined contribution on WRS. I am mindful of the challenge before you. Typically, in fact, every year I have been here, you have heard from agencies and marked up the budget over a total of 20 days, 10 in December, 10 in January. Due to some scheduling challenges, that calendar for this session is 17 days, 3 days fewer than my historical experience. Specifically, that committee is scheduled to commence on Tuesday, December 12th, and adjourn for the December period on Wednesday, December 20th. So rather than 2 weeks, you have a total of 7 days of hearings from the agencies there. I only raise this because we will work with the co-chairs, of course. We have developed a draft calendar, but the additional 6 budget bill or bill drafts, which you have heard today, will require some potentially longer days in that 7-day December period. We will also work with the co-chairs. We typically do some committee training. And I know that Karen Vaughn has emailed you regarding your lunch preferences, getting into a little housekeeping here. We will be making those additional announcements through email over the next 2 months as well. So I encourage you to monitor those. With that, Madam Chairman, that concludes my summary and remarks. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Richards? All right. Question for Karen, Ms. Vaughn.
Could you remind us how much that is in overall?
So scolded.
So scolded. My initial inquiry to you all had to do with preferences, of which I received 1 reply. Thank you, Representative Walters. Not naming names. And based upon those preferences determines how much we will need to collect from the members. So until I have a consensus, I don't have an answer for you, unfortunately.
So what's the question?
What do you want to eat?
The questions had to do with dietary needs, preferences for catering versus restaurants. I will send out an email either tomorrow or Monday recapping the decision points so that you can let me know and I can get back to you before December.
Thank you. Representative Walters, what did you pick? All right. All right, committee members, thank you. You heard Mr. Richards kind of caution to all of us that we have a packed agenda for December and January beyond what is typical for a JAC budget, where we have these bill drafts to address, and not just small bill drafts, but fairly big, particularly when it relates to that retirement bill we're putting forward, in addition to a compact schedule to do the budget hearings. So this was preparation, my skill set for what that may look like. Brace yourselves. But we'll keep it on track and under budget as typical. So
we don't have my brother Phil as a chair of appropriations, because he would typically run till about 8 at night every night.
that's my bedtime. So we won't do that.
It's 9.
We will not do that. We can. I think we might be able to do that. I need to ask Mr. Richards if we can add days in January.
Madam Chair, you certainly can. You have resources to do so. You could add days in December or January. I do have one explicit requirement from the current management council, which is non-negotiable from our perspective, and that is for the 3rd year in a row, they are insisting that there will be a budget bill on the desks of all members prior to gaveling in. In order to do that, unfortunately, we can't add too many days at the end of January and still meet their expectation.
So that means we need to prioritize the budget bill. And then the other bills that we have need to come secondarily so we can meet that deadline.
Since when have we paid attention to management?
We're rule followers here. We're rule followers here. All right, Joint Appropriations Committee, thank you for your time and attention today. I think we did good work and learned a lot of great things to advance the interests of the people of Wyoming. Thank you, Mr. Richards, Mr. Fuller, full LSO staff, Ms. Vaughn. Excellent work, Mr. Hibbard. Appreciate you. With that, the meeting is adjourned.